and welcome to the regular meeting for the District Council on Tuesday, February 18th. Following Homish Owamio. We are always fortunate to be meeting on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Motion to adopt the agenda, moved by Council French, seconded by Council Whitford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any notice of motion, Council? We don't have any delegations this evening. We do have two public items this evening, but if there's someone who has an item that's not on the agenda that they feel they need to address tonight, this is your opportunity. If you feel it's something that can't wait 2 weeks. Seeing none. We do have two items on the agenda that will have public input. We're going to do the public hearing first for Centennial Way, and then the DP for Midway. And then Council will entertain third reading for the Centennial Way. I don't want to move that up just because we have two timed items and people may be here for both of them. So we'll do it in that order as indicated. Staff will put some blue sheets on your spots for letters that came in today. So, with that, I will turn it over to staff for their presentation on the. Oh, you're right. I've done a public hearing in a long time. Okay, so I have to read this statement. It's quite lengthy, and then I'll turn it over to staff for their presentation. So this public hearing is convened pursuant to Part 14, Division 3 of the Local Government Act to allow the public to make representations to Council respecting matters contained in the proposed District of Squamish Zoning Bylaw 2200-2011 Amendment Bylaw number 2529-2018 to the CD90 zone and Centennial Way. Everyone present will be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaw. No one will be discouraged or prevented from making their views known. However, it is important that remarks be restricted to matters contained in the proposed bylaw. Members of Council may ask questions following presentations. However, the function of Council at a public hearing is to listen rather than to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw. In considering the proposed bylaw, Council has received documents which may influence its decision. These documents are available for review and comment and have been included as part of the Planning Department report, or if received later, handed out at the meeting and included in the public hearing package. If any documents are submitted during the hearing, please feel free to review the document during the hearing by asking staff. Members of the public shall maintain order and quiet and shall not applaud or interrupt any speech or action of members of Council or any other person addressing Council. I will now call on the Planning Department to introduce the bylaw.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Elaine Naseby and I'm a community planner. This is Jonas Filaniskis, the Director of Planning and Building, and Laura Prinsek, Municipal Engineer. This evening we are bringing forward the public hearing for 1701 and 1940 Centennial Way to rezone it to a comprehensive development zone from its current campground zone. The Centennial Way rezoning application has been under review for some time and has had previous presentations to Council. The parcels are located south of the Mamcram River near to Brennan Park. The south parcel is located adjacent to a portion of recently developed Seven Peaks townhomes. To the east is a hydro corridor with riparian channels, and farther east are industrial lands. Directly west is the district-owned parcel at 42,000 Loggers Lane with the current tenants Flinroe and the Squamish Montessori School. And Centennial Way is a designated truck route. This image roughly shows us the makeup of the two parcels, which are divided into three sites. The purple color is employment space, and the north site has commercial retail along with office space. The south site has light industrial, office, and a childcare facility right here. The yellow in this image is a rental residential apartment building, including affordable housing units. And the pink color in this image is market residential with condos and townhomes on the north site and townhomes on the south site. So just to reiterate, we have site 1 is the north parcel, site 2 is the south side of the south parcel, and site 3 is the north side of the south parcel. For the public's benefit, I will run through the development proposal. So on the north side of Centennial Way, there is a mixed-use building, 6 stories, which now has a smaller retail building in front of it. So on the ground floor, we have retail commercial space. On the floor above, we have office, and then we have 4 floors of apartments above that. We have townhomes fronting Centennial Way, and as you can see behind those are a concealed parking area, and the development steps up to meet the level of the dike. On the south side of Centennial, as you enter, there is a 3-story office building and a childcare facility. The childcare facility is in purple. In the middle of the south parcel is a 5-story purpose-built rental apartment building, and that's where there are 22 units of affordable housing. The south parcel, the south side of it, is 75 townhomes. And as we step up, well, we've already talked about these. So here we can now see the townhomes that would be along the Mamcram River Dike. And then on the south side, we see the upper floor of the office building, the residential, as well as a light industrial building directly on Centennial Way. So that's a full floor of light industrial at grade with a full level of mezzanine. And above that, on the portion that's closest to Centennial Way, is 2 additional stories of office space. These site sections show us the proposed building massing and heights. So as you can see, this is the north parcel with the townhomes along the river and the mixed-use building. This section is through the light industrial building, showing the 2 levels of office above that, the office building beside that, and then the townhomes south of that. And this section shows us through the light industrial building, the 5-story apartment building, and the townhomes. The development has been designed to be a walkable neighborhood node. Day-to-day services, jobs, childcare, and housing are all located in the development. The lands are centrally located just off the district-wide corridor trail and the primary bus routes. The sites have internal paths connecting open space and the various uses to one another. There are also trail and path connections to the larger neighborhood, so there's a trail that would cross directly to Brennan Park. There would be a new trail going north-south as well, connecting the 2 sites together. And then the district's corridor trail would be extended along Centennial Way. There are upgrades to the dike trail, including a proposed dike pavilion. There would be a new intersection upgrade. A roundabout is proposed. And this shows a connection directly to the Seven Peaks townhomes for development interconnectedness. This application includes a community amenity contribution. So as mentioned, there are affordable housing units. These are 23 units in the apartment building. 2 of those units would be secured specifically for ECE and childcare workers in Squamish. And there's also 1 affordable townhouse. There is a cash value going to critical amenities in the amount of $1,300,000. That includes part of the intersection upgrade, as well as $1 million cash. For active transportation and parks, there's a total value of $370,000. That includes a new bus stop and shelter north of Brennan Park on Loggers Lane. the Dyke Pavilion that we mentioned. There would also be a signalized pedestrian crossing across Centennial Way for safe pedestrian access, as well as $250,000 in cash. This slide shows the additional CAC value that is above and beyond the CAC with relation to the scale of this rezoning. So we have the childcare facility, we have public art for $111,000. There would be public access right-of-ways on the public space and trails on this development. The other half of the Loggers and Centennial intersection upgrade. Yes, so in total, the CAC would be equivalent to $2.2 million and 23 affordable units. The project phasing would see the Site 3 developed first, so that's the area just south of Centennial Way. And that would also include the car share vehicles as they comprise part of the parking count for Site 3, so that would be 3 car share vehicles. Also, the reconstruction of the Loggers Lane intersection is in Phase 1. Phase 2 would be the north side of Centennial Way, and Phase 3 would be the townhomes at the south side of Centennial. Since the second reading meeting with Council in January of this year, there are 2 items that are new information that I'm going to summarize. The first was the introduction of a small retail building of 2,000 square feet on the north parcel. And the purpose of this was to create street presence and activation on Centennial to draw people from Brennan Park and the Corridor Trail, and also add additional employment space. The larger building behind has been revised to accommodate the new building, and it creates in it more attractive leasable space, as it has less sort of empty space in the middle as it did in the previous iteration. So this revision results in an increase in employment space. So now the previous total employment space across both sites was 28.4%, and now we have 28.7% employment space. And I will say that the parking on Site 1 is all being met with that revision. The second item was the childcare facility. So Council asked for additional information about the childcare facility to ensure that it would be a successful space. So yes, this proposed mixed-use development does include a dedicated childcare facility that can accommodate 25 children for group childcare, which is 30 months to school age. And it would be built in the first phase of the Centennial Way development. The district, so the district has been doing quite a lot of work in childcare with a recent childcare needs assessment and strategy in 2018. And we're currently facilitating additional work on a childcare action plan with community partners. So staff have reviewed the proposed childcare facility for the following elements. So the exclusive use, so this space is dedicated specifically for childcare use. And then in the big picture, universal childcare does rely on building out a public system. However, to secure needed space through private development, the intention with this proposal is not to mandate a non-profit operator, so it would be available to a to-profit or a non-profit operator. The applicant has identified that they do anticipate significantly lower rents for this space than for the other commercial areas. And the market will dictate the rent amount as the space is secured for childcare use only. And then it does meet the minimum size guidelines. So the minimum net indoor area requirement for 25 children is 1,938 square feet, and this provides over 2,000 square feet. And the minimum outdoor area is 1,615 square feet, and Centennial Way provides 2,400 square feet. In terms of parking, the parking has been revised since the second reading plan, and so we've now secured additional parking for childcare. So we've now got 2 childcare staff parking spaces in the vicinity of the childcare facility. There are 3 dedicated childcare drop-off stalls, as well as 1 drop-off stall during daycare drop-off and pickup hours. That would also be shared with townhouse visitor parking during the other hours. And as mentioned earlier, there are 2 of the 22 affordable apartment units that will be secured specifically for ECE or local community childcare employees, with a priority given to those who are working at this site. The 2040 official community plan designated the lands mixed employment with consideration of its central location and the need to provide employment space and services for the anticipated residential growth in the Brennan Park area. The proposal is aligned with district objectives regarding neighborhood nodes. There is a significant variety of residential type and tenure, including purpose-built rental and affordable rental. The mixed-use development incorporates employment, housing, childcare, and recreational amenities in close proximity. The housing density and mix of uses will contribute to a walkable, bikeable community and add to the need and benefit of transit services. Locating multiple uses and services in close proximity helps in reducing greenhouse gas emissions by reducing the need for vehicle travel. And at second reading, we did mention that the townhomes on Site 2 will be on electric energy, not natural gas. In terms of public consultation, the legal notification for this public hearing has been met. So we've delivered notices to neighbors within 100 meters. There's been 2 notices in the chief newspaper. This proposal has been underway for some time. Prior to the public hearing, we had 3 public comments that identified concern with the development, and those have all been addressed in previous council meetings. The concerns were related to the area being designated an important bird area, concern of the loss of campground, and concern about development near the river. In the recent week or so, we received 1 additional letter with some questions, comments, and concern, which I will address, and that was from one of the residents of the Seven Peaks townhomes. And then we've had 8 letters of support for the development, and these speak to the mix of uses, the childcare facility, employment space, affordable housing, the amenities, the trail improvements, as well as a mention that they have used some local workforce already. And then the Malmcram River Access Society has a campground in close proximity to this development. And so we've heard from that proponent at an earlier stage of this proposal, as well as again recently. And so they've highlighted the need for water service to their low amenity campground. Sorry, I'll mention that there was 1 additional letter that I've just been made aware of, and it was also in support for water being brought to the campground, to the Malmcram River Access Society campground. So to speak to the Seven Peaks comments that were received, there was 2, well, I'll mention the 3 items. So the first was a concern about the adjacency of the proposed townhomes to the existing townhomes at Seven Peaks. So these images show you where they are in close proximity, which is at the southwest corner of the south site. And so the letter highlighted concern that there is a lock-off suite. There are 3 lock-off suites in the proposal to add to the mix of housing types. And so this also has a lesser setback to these units. So I've asked the applicant's architect to provide those dimensions. The the 7 Peaks townhomes are zoned RM2, which is multifamily residential. They have an interior side setback of, I believe it's 4.7 meters. I think that 7 Peaks is 4.7 meters. The RM2 zone has a interior side setback requirement of 4.57 meters. The RM2 zone has a rear setback of 9.15 meters, but for the 7 Peaks site, their front lot line is on Loggers Lane. Their rear setback, their rear lot line is back here. Because of the orientation of the Centennial Way parcel, this south property line is their south lot line. However, if the parcel adjacent at 42,000 Loggers was to be developed, that would be an interior side setback, and that would have a setback of 4.5 meters from townhomes. So just to give a context of that. So the proposed townhomes are 4.5 meters is this distance here, and the Lockoff Suite is 3.84 meters distance from the property line. The 7 Peaks comment also requested that there be a pedestrian connection from their development to the Mamquam River, and this has been proposed through the development, so there is a public access right-of-way agreement on the proposed development along with a trail connecting the two developments. The other 7 Peaks comment was about concern for safety with a roundabout versus a four-way stop in consideration of the corridor trail, Brennan Park. There's a Montessori school, so there's quite a lot of pedestrians and cyclists in the area. We have Laura Prinsecure, engineer, who can speak to this item further, but there are advantages and disadvantages to both. The traffic report did include a sort of a pro and con list of roundabouts to four-way stop. We can study this further to ensure that we provide the safest solution, but from a district staff engineering point of view, it is felt that a roundabout is safer for active transportation reasons for pedestrians and cyclists. And then to speak to the Mamquam River Campground water service. So early in the application process, the applicant provided a $350,000 value to offset the loss of campground use by supplying water to the nearby MRAS campground. During the application process, that value has been moved to cash that council can direct where it goes. While putting a pressurized water pipe through the district's dike infrastructure to service the campground is not best practice if it can be avoided, it is doable with proper design. The MRAS campground proponent highlights the need for water for fire suppression reasons also. And MRAS has provided a letter of support for the extension of a water line along Centennial Way from Vancouver Coastal Health, who say that would also supply water to adjacent properties with existing water supply concerns. Landowner approval would be required as it would extend along properties that are not owned by the district. And then just to go back, these are the two items that MRAS has asked for. So number one is their priority, which is a district water main be extended along Centennial Way to the Rod and Gun Club driveway with a fire hydrant. And then from that, if it's engineering possible, MRAS would pay for it to cross the dike to their campground site. Their second choice would be for the water line, for a water line extended up Centennial Way, but it wouldn't be a water main grade, so you wouldn't be able to fight fires with it, but it would bring potable water to their site, close to their site, and they would also pay to have it cross specifically to their property. So staff's recommendation to council tonight is that, subject to the public hearing, that this rezoning bylaw be given third reading. Prior to adoption of the bylaw, there are several items to be completed. One is to enter into a land development agreement to secure all the items that have been presented here tonight. We need Inspector of Dikes approval for works that relate to the Mamquam Dike. We need an agreement between the district and the applicant regarding a utility corridor and trail that are proposed to run along our district property at 42,000 Loggers Lane. A mitigation plan for loss of the trees. Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure approval, and then registration of a number of covenants on title, including flood hazard, statutory right-of-way for public access, a covenant requiring the strata to enforce no parking on short driveways that might extend into the strata road, a noise covenant for the Squamish Valley Rod and Gun Club to make people aware of the existing noise, as well as an environmental covenant securing restoration, revegetation, and protection for the streamside protection and enhancement area on the parcel. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newby. Before I go to the public, I'll just ask council if they have any clarifying questions at this point. Councilor Bettengill?
In some of the other applications where there's been commitment to some sort of renewable energy infrastructure, that's been included in the covenant. And I didn't see that in this one, in the resolution or the covenant that mentioned specifically. Is there a reason for that?
Through you, Mayor, there isn't a reason. That was a recent addition at the second reading meeting, and so that was an oversight, and that could be included as a covenant.
Thank you. Could you go back to the explanation of the setback? I just want to make sure that I understand that piece. You had a great slide. So the setback from the. So can you do it one more time?
Yes, sorry. I actually had an image with dimensions on it that I should have put in, but okay. So the Seven Peaks townhomes are set back 4.7 meters, and the RM2 zone that they are has a requirement for a setback of 4.57 meters. The townhomes on the Centennial Way site are set back 4.5 meters to the balconies. The rest of the building being set back a little bit farther than that. The Lockoff suite is set back 3.84 meters. And sorry.
Okay, and the Lockoff suite here is in the sort of the orange color. Is that the tightest space?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's one. Sorry, continue.
And so typically, like if two townhouse developments were side by side, they would both have an interior side setback of 4.5. What's a little bit different about this site is that this is actually their rear lot line. So the public comment highlighted that in the RM2 zone, the setback is 9.15 meters for a rear lot line, but having said that, this is a comprehensive development zone. This isn't an RM2 zone, and so yeah, it's unusual that you would have like a rear lot line adjacent to an interior side setback line.
Okay.
It's not clear.
No, that.
Okay.
Thank you. I think I got it.
Any other questions?
So, we're talking about a walkable community, or I think that's part of the goal here, and just thinking, looking through the zones and what sort of retail is allowed in the different places, are we specific enough, or do we feel a need to sort of require neighborhood pharmacy, neighborhood grocery? I'm just thinking we've got childcare there, so can you get diapers and milk and juice just kind of walking, or do you have to go downtown or to Garibaldi Estates to get those things?
Mayor, through you, so the north parcel has, has a neighborhood commercial use, I believe it is. And so that neighborhood commercial use allows what you're talking about. So it allows those local retail businesses.
And I guess I'm trying to understand better allow versus require. And if we're trying to make sure these are walkable, sort of, you get everything there, do we need to require as opposed to allow?
Through the mayor, it does have a bit, yeah, it's not so prescriptive as to ask for that specific use there.
I was just wondering if you could talk about the bus stop and how it works in relation to the corridor trail, the one that's proposed.
Through the mayor, yes. So the proposal is that it would be on the, there would be a bus stop, and you can see it with the red text there on Loggers Lane. My understanding is that it would be right adjacent to the road with the trail going behind it. Does that answer the question?
Well, it just looks like you come through the traffic circle and then the bus would stop traffic. And then people would alight down right onto the corridor trail.
Through the mayor, yes. So the bus stop was studied at an earlier, for an earlier council meeting, and at that time, council did ask whether there should be a bus lay-by, but we asked our active transportation staff, who said that the volumes there, it makes sense that it actually does stop traffic and somebody gets on. It's not anticipated that that's a concern there. We definitely looked at whether there should be a lay-by, and the recommendation was that it was not recommended there.
Okay, maybe let me ask this. Where is the bus? Where do people waiting for the bus stand? Are they standing on the corridor trail, or are we building a platform for them off the trail?
It is off the trail. There is a $50,000 value in the CAC to build a bus shelter, a concrete pad, a pole, and a bench.
And can you just point out on the map again where water will end up once this is built? In terms of access to the campgrounds?
Where water will be.
Well, there's mention of taking something to the dike, sort of an endpoint, and then I believe council has the option to spend its CAC money in any way it sees fit. I'm just trying to figure out where on the map we're at.
Okay, through the mayor, currently this north parcel, the proponent has offered to provide a water, sort of a public water tap here that the public is welcome to access with some public parking. However, the campground, that's not that close to the campground, so the campground, it would be much better for them for it to be over at the Rod and Gun Club Entry Drive.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, Councilor French.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about the differences in safety concerns between traffic circle and conventional four-way stop intersection. What are the differences there from a safety perspective for pedestrians and cyclists?
Through the mayor, I'll pass it over to our engineer, Laura.
Yes, through Mayor Elliott. The main difference that I think is important, well, a couple things. What wasn't considered when this was first looked at, back when a report was done a few years back, was that in order for a four-way intersection to properly accommodate the truck traffic that's going to be going through it, because there is a fairly significant amount of truck traffic that comes down Centennial Way, they'd have to put the pedestrian islands on it and have those right-hand slip lanes in order to enable the turning movement of the trucks. So the intersection would have to get quite a bit bigger, and then it would require pedestrians and cyclists to then cross a slip lane to a pedestrian island that wouldn't be big enough to have a cargo bike or a bike with a trailer off the back. And as you know, that trail gets quite busy on the nice days, and then it would have to cross 2 lanes of traffic, or 2 travel lanes, and then land on another pedestrian island, and then cross another slip lane. And slip lanes, as you know, there's no stop requirement, so it's actually, they act rather a lot like a traffic circle. So the alternative is to have a traffic circle where, in fact, traffic circles, they pinch down and become fairly narrow before they widen out to the circle. And you put another pedestrian island in the middle of like between the 2 lanes. And then so you only have to cross 1 lane of traffic. You land on a pedestrian island they've got fancy words for it. And then you cross 1 lane of traffic and then you're on the other side. So you actually reduce the pedestrian or cyclist crossing distance. And the traffic circle itself warns vehicles they need to slow down. Because quite often people are coming up too quickly on intersections. They're like rushing to the stops. They can stop as quickly as possible and beat the other people in the other lanes, and then they rush on. So traffic circles have different cues that they send to drivers. The other thing that they do is reducing speeds just in and of itself means that you reduce crash rates considerably, and you reduce the severity of crash rates considerably, because you pretty much can't tear through a traffic circle at 50 kilometers an hour. Well, at least it makes it quite difficult. Like, it's an awkward motion at that point. So those are just some of the things. And I mean, this isn't. I don't know that we need to have this completely decided tonight that it's going to be one or the other. I think we're open to hearing feedback and having more discussion. But this is our thoughts at the moment.
All right, before I go to the public, any other questions? Okay. So I now invite the applicant or representative to comment on the proposed rezoning, after which persons affected will be given the opportunity to speak. After I've confirmed it is your turn, please approach the podium. Don't touch our microphone though, it's quite sensitive. And commence your remarks by clearly stating your name and address. Please note that speakers will be given up to 5 minutes to address council. If you don't finish what you're saying in 5 minutes, you still have to step away from the podium, let others speak, and then you can certainly come back. So I've got a list here. I will go through my list, and then if there's others that want to speak, just raise your hand, and I will invite people to the podium. So first up is the proponent, Mr. Frank Carlson.
Okay, good evening, Mayor and members of council. I'm Brent Carlson of 436 East 5th Street, North Vancouver. I've been managing Anthem's proposal for 1701 and 1940 Centennial Way for some time now. Preliminary discussions with the District of Squamish and Anthem began in late spring of 2016, and our official rezoning application was submitted in March of 2017. So we have worked diligently over the past 3 years with staff, previous council, and you, the current council, to shape and evolve this rezoning application, leading us to where it stands today. Changes and comments, for which there have been many, have been implemented by our team to help fulfill the vision for this proposal in order to produce what will be a vibrant, friendly, and pleasing neighborhood node. The newly created neighborhood node will become a small community where people will have the opportunity to live and work and even play. Work within, and you've heard some of this before from the planner, Elaine, but work in the commercial and office space on Site 1, or work in the office and light industrial spaces on Site 3, or perhaps even work within a home-based business. These employment spaces will synergize with a host of housing options, from the condos and townhomes on Site 1 to the purpose-built rental and affordable rental units on Site 3, and also with the townhomes and duplex units on Site 2. This community of mixed employment and housing diversity will be further enhanced by a 25-person or child care facility located on Site 3. All of this within a walkable, pedestrian-friendly, and safe environment located kitty corner to Brennan Park and its many recreation services, as well as to the Sea to Sky Connector Trail. We are excited with the opportunities this walkable, workable, and livable neighborhood node will bring to the Squamish community at large. And we are available along with our consultants tonight should further questions arise. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Next on my list, Catherine Rockendale.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Catherine Rockendale, 2538 Erin Way, Garibaldi Highlands. A couple of people in the community brought this proposal to my attention, and I thought I'd look at it, particularly because of two things. One was the affordable housing units, and the other was the childcare. I was involved in the Sea to Sky Community Services Centrepoint volunteer fundraising initiative, and the people who brought it to my attention were people who actually were on a fixed income and were able to move into those units, and they shared with me the difference it made in their lives. So I looked at this because of the below market rental and the corresponding policy that the District of Squamish has been working on around affordable housing, and I applaud that in terms of ensuring that long-time residents who might be on fixed income or have different abilities to stay within the community are able to have different housing sources. The other thing I like about this is childcare, and I've been involved in lots of childcare facilities over the years throughout the corridor, and I know childcare is a big issue, not just for families, but also trying to attract childcare providers and people who work in EC. They don't make a lot of money. It's a very difficult place to get employees, and so having the ability to offer 2 units for employees, I think, is a really great thing. And for that reason, I'm very supportive of this proposal. The other things that I like about it that really stood out for me is one, the neighborhood connectivity in terms of the proximity to Brennan Park. The idea that because we have so many young families in this community and more coming, that they can walk over to Brennan Park and enjoy those amenities with their families. The connections to trails, I enjoy riding my bike, and so do many people in their community. And I often hear people talking about how much they love how the upgrades that you've made to the trails. As well, the other thing that I like, and a number of my friends mentioned, was the waterfront pavilion, because if it's really raining hard, which often it does in Squamish, it's nice to the idea to have covered space. And I would say I also applaud the covered bus stops. Because sometimes the wind, your umbrella gets sucked inside out. So having covered bus shelters is really great. So I think that this proposal, while I recognize that council has to balance competing interests in terms of the impact on neighbors and concerns about traffic and density, I think that this particular proposal checks a lot of boxes that are really important to myself as a resident and citizen of Squamish, and to many other people. So I'm hoping that we make the best decisions as we move forward, and I just thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Next up is John Harvey.
Mayor and Council, John Harvey, 2541 Lamond Way in the Garibaldi Highlands. I'm here representing the Mamcram River Access Society. We support Anthem's rezoning application because densification is obvious, being so close to the rec center and the corridor trail. It's also the geographic center of Squamish. The Mamcombe River splits our town north to south. It's in a fine location, and densification is happening in the region, so we certainly support them on that, and they have also supported us from the beginning of our proposal. Many years we've been in process. Anthem has been very supportive of us. They've donated towards our cause, and for that we thank you, Brent and Chris. So the next point is, as much as we support housing densification, we also support camping densification. Let's recognize the sad loss of the campground and RV space that was there, and that sort of has now forced the Mamcombe River Campground to step up to the plate as a bit of a replacement campground, yet we don't have any services. The old Eagle Vista had full servicing. So we're 2 years operating into a 30-year lease, and we've been surprised by the numbers that we're seeing and welcoming as a four-season campground. We are an urban campground, a very important urban campground, and through this development, CACs now is the opportunity to bring the fire hydrant up Centennial Way. The gun range benefits as well, of course. It is very expensive, we understand, to engineer water line through the dike, but we have to step up to the plate for that because the long-term vision, we can't imagine a campground without water. So we have to do that. Our price structure really leaves no margin for building massive water service infrastructure. We're not for profit, whereby all revenue goes into basic campground management and small proposed projects. Finally, though MRAS is a small grassroots organization, we're not going anywhere. We're here for a long time. The campground is a 24/7, 365 operation, and it will go on forever, past my time. And our mandate from our society, one of the board of directors is right here, is our mandate is to keep it affordable. So our prices are cheap, and they will remain that way for a long time. But obviously we need district support, and so it seems that the full service, as much as expensive as it is fairly crucial. We also help mitigate van life issues in Squamish, which are only going to get worse. And really we represent a very important community tourism infrastructure. So I appreciate your time. I thank Anthem for this opportunity for us to get some water. So I hope that you guys can agree to that big CAC contribution. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Harvey. Next on my list is Mike Morgan.
Mayor and Council, my name is Mike Morgan, President of Squamish Valley Rod and Gun Club. I live on 2114 Ridgeway. We have asked for water from the district for our own property a year ago. Actually, prior to that, but it's on record as a year ago. To me, it's only feasible as bringing in the minimum fire hydrant requirements. Just straight water line is not sufficient for the properties I've sent in. We, like I say, we require that. It wouldn't be, I assume by the drawings, it's not going to cross our driveway. It's only a matter of short distance. Roundabouts, personally, I walked my dog, one of them the last 7 years on Centennial Way. There is no issues with the truckers. The issue is the intersection of Brennan Park with the pedestrians and the bicycles. You put a roundabout in, they're still going to blow through the intersection and you're not going to stop them. The roundabout is not, in my books, feasible because the truckers are not an issue. They give everyone lots of room. They slow down, they go around the horses, myself, whatever, and not a problem. A roundabout is just going to create more issue of the bicycles going straight through that intersection, which they already do. But we support John for his water requirements. We don't, at this point, require it. We would like it, but more for the fire hydrant, and yes, we would connect. We would like to see the fresh water for taps because the well service on Centennial is not reliable. We've been 50 years on well, and the problems dealing with Vancouver Coastal Health, not saying they're a problem, but the requirements for water are huge. So it would be very nice to see the water extended at fire hydrant level. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, next up, Matt Parker.
Hello, Mayor and Council. I'm Matt Parker. I live at 1114 Wilson Crescent. I'm here to speak in support of bringing water along Centennial Way. It seems to me to make a lot of sense to have fire hydrants in an industrial area so close to a residential area. Places dealing with hot asphalt, etc. I see that as a safety issue. I see potable water to the campsite and whatnot also as a safety issue, and perhaps even a human rights issue. Just speaking briefly to the intersection at Centennial Way and Loggers Lane. Personally, from my perspective, I prefer a four-way stop. I am quite often shepherding long streams of children, which you may have if you have a daycare near that site. And when vehicles approach a traffic circle, they're not expecting to stop. And I've had issues. That really scares me when I take the Discovery Trail and I get to Commercial Way. Rather than use the highway crossings, I usually go to where the traffic's going to be slower, down to along Commercial, and cross my students or my charges across Commercial. Now, at that particular traffic circle, there's a bit of a blind with some of the shrubbery at the corner of Walmart. Cars can't see that there's a long line of children crossing there. And even if they could see, they're glancing down at their radio or something. They're expecting to roll right through there. There's not that many people using that crosswalk. But it scares me every time I bring children across there. I'd much prefer to see a four-way stop where, and I'd agree with the previous speaker, truckers are exceptional. They stop at it and are really careful and courteous. And that's part of what makes that area safer, I think. Thanks for your time. I really think it's worth considering bringing water along that corridor. An amazing amount of volunteer hours have gone into making that community amenity, and that would certainly support it. I think they need your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, excuse me, is Stefan Perron.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Yes, Stéphane Perron, 1125 Laramie Road, and I'm coming here as a private individual. Although I am well familiar with the campground, my son had a summer job there last summer, which he very much enjoyed. But I'm coming from the position that the water, I want to speak to the community contribution, amenities contribution, and how this represents a very unique opportunity to bring water further down the road on Centennial Way. So I'm coming from a position that water is a must. Water needs to be brought there at one point, and how this represents a very unique opportunity to bring water that way. I don't think well is an option. Well water is not an option. I believe this position that we need water there is supported by the Vancouver Health Authority, or Vancouver Coastal Health, and that also I believe that our fire department is very supportive of the idea of having a fire hydrant in that region of the neighborhood. And if this doesn't happen now, it's a sizable amount of money that's required to bring that there, and if it doesn't happen now, I just don't see when it will ever happen. I don't believe we have any other rezonings further down the line. that would be another opportunity further down the line to bring water there. I think this is it. This is the opportunity. Correct me if I'm wrong, but so this is the opportunity. I can't speak for the Rod and Gun Club, but I can't imagine how it would be a great benefit to them as well. I'm thinking of a scenario where perhaps their aging facilities come down, who knows, fire or something like that. They have to rebuild this well-established club. I believe maybe upwards of 1,000 members who need to rebuild, and how much simpler that would make things for them if there was possibility of building to modern standards with sprinklers as would be required for a new building. So this would be a great advantage to that club as well. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Crown. Next up is Adam Mercer.
Good evening. I'm Adam Mercer, 8517 Ropeto Way, Whistler, and I'm going to decline to speak this evening. Everything's been spoken. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Chris Brown.
Good evening. My wife and I own at Seven Peaks, 5839548. We just moved back to North Vancouver for to be closer to school. I'm here to speak in support of the project. Owning at Seven Peaks, I like that there's going to be a variety of housing types built right behind our site, with apartment buildings, affordable rental, and more townhomes. I also like that we'll be able to walk to a little grocery store or a coffee shop. I think that's much easier in that area. With trail improvements along the dike will be nice. A lot of residents there do walk their dogs up along the dike, which is great. And living next to the rec center has been really good. You can walk there with the kids, go to the pool, hang out. So I think the project as proposed is great. I look forward to seeing it.
So that's the end of my list, but if there's others that would like to speak, just raise your hand. Yep, right there in the middle. Just your name and address and whether you represent yourself or...
Good evening. My name is Jen Teal. I live at 2120 Ridgeway Crescent, but I operate Centennial Stables at 1995 Centennial Way. I'm here today just to make sure that everyone is aware that we are there. We are a big business. We are growing rapidly since the close of House Sound Stables. We also run the Therapeutic Riding Center out of there. So we have children on horses daily, many, many children. So I just wanted to make sure that we are included in any traffic plans, because this is a big thing. So this barn has been there for about 35 years. We are not going anywhere. We are currently turning into a Crown lease. We love the neighborhood. I think that the development will be really neat, honestly. I think it's great, but I do want to make sure that we are not going to be pushed out in the process or become a nuisance, so to speak, to all the new influx of families and businesses and that sort of thing. So definitely I'd like to touch on the water situation. I think it would be amazing if we could run a water line down there. It's been hard for us. We run off the grid, and we've been doing so for a few years, and now that we are growing, it would be a lot easier for us and a lot better for the horses that we could have some actual city water. So definitely agree with that. Also, the four-way stop, I feel like the roundabout would not be a good situation for the pedestrians, the horses, or the cyclists. Like other people have said, the roundabout gives people the idea that they don't have to stop for anything. I've seen it. I've been at that property for a long time, and just going up in the Highlands and going through the other roundabouts, you see people, you can do 50 and around a roundabout. They go up the curbs, they go all over the place. I agree that the trucks in the area have been amazing. They slow down. There's just no issues there with them at all, but I do think the roundabout will cause issues between all the different sorts of traffic. I feel like they're not going to see us in time. There's going to be screeching brakes. There's going to be accidents. So I feel like maybe flashing lights instead, the amber lights, so that the pedestrians can cross. I don't have any statistics to back it up, but I do feel like people just don't stop, and they're not going to. And I think Squamish still has, we're a heritage town, so horses do have the right of way. So we don't want to bung up any traffic either. We don't want to have to go into the roundabout and make everyone slowly follow behind us. We need to have a safe area that we can bypass all that, and we need to be visible. So that's the concern on that. And yeah, basically that's it. I just wanted you guys to know that we're there and we need to be seen and we need to be safe. Lots of kids. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, just hold everything, and we've got a question.
I'm all nervous. I don't do public speaking. Like
Oh, you're
speaking
done
straight.
great, Steele. So Councilor Grace has a question for you.
Thank you. And I didn't know there were horses up there. I was just wondering where your operation is. Does it show up in that picture?
So you can see the Mamcom campground there. So we are just to the left of that. You can see the hydro right away. You can actually see our barns. Yep, there you go. So those are all barns and shelters. So we have 4 acres, very narrow, goes all the way back to the Masheter. So we're hidden in there, and a lot of people don't know we are there. But yeah, we've been there for quite a while, and it gets pretty busy. And yeah, we're a big part of that community, so I'm hoping that the development really sees us as something that's kind of cool and not a nuisance. And we're totally up for like manure receptacles, if you guys want those throughout the development, that we would come and empty and make sure that all of our poops are going in there and not on the trails. We would like to work with you to make sure that we can all enjoy that area together.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Did I see another hand? Yeah.
Thank you. Darren McCartney, 1000 Lanark Place, Garibaldi Highlands. Full disclosure, I was involved in this 3 years ago, working for the seller selling the land, and I have not followed the file until the last couple months again, so it's kind of removed from it. I know these larger sites, 10 acres here in these areas that are totally undeveloped are very tricky for both applicants and staff to work through to get a healthy mix that works for everybody. And I just want to say, looking at the final product here, that I think that a very healthy balance has been struck. One of the city objectives I know going into this was to maximize commercial space. I think that's been pushed to, it's still viable, but definitely pushed to a healthy balance that will fit into the site without going too far. When you do go too far, you start just getting traffic issues, adjacency issues, and one of the big things on a site like this, you've got so many competing uses in the neighborhood and zonings in the neighborhood that it's really tricky to integrate to the sites around you. And so I really like the way that the Seven Peaks site has been respected. It's integrated with residential to residential. There's a lot of commercial space on this site given the size of the site. And it has separate access and separate uses are well delineated. So all those businesses should be able to function without getting in the way of the residential inhabitants, and then the people living there can enjoy the benefits of that. So I think it's something that has gone well on a site basis, and I think also that from a neighborhood basis, as the whole area further develops, that you do have the opportunity to add some support services, retail, all that kind of stuff that'll benefit the neighborhood. So I just think it's a job well done in striking that balance. So I support it moving forward.
Okay, I'll take your hand first, and then yours afterwards.
Council and Mayor, that's for you. I'm the manager of the Mamcom River Campground, and I just thought one thing we haven't heard.
What's your name and your address?
Sorry, my name is Patrick Paul, and my address is Mamcom River Campground. I do live on site. So I'd like just to speak to a couple things that haven't been mentioned, and it's the volume of people that we use in the season. We have up to 250 cars put on our site per night, and over up to 200 people on certain nights. We have that many people. You have to ask yourself, where are they going to get their water? Right now, they're going to go to Brenner Park, or they'll bring their water in. Now, if we're going to go to the new one that's been proposed, I think that's a lot of cars going to be driving to where the community, many is currently located under the proposal from the I just want you to understand there's a lot of people who benefit from this that are currently using the services at Brenner Park. They're going to use the showers at Brenner Park. Our plan is to eventually have showers. They're going to Brenner Park for water, and it's causing a lot of issues at Brenner Park that we hear, off the cuff. Some not our people in particular, but people are going in there and using the services far in excess of the ability of the service to handle it. And we're moving a whole bunch more people into the neighborhood. It's going to put more pressure on any water, and that's how bringing a tap up to our property will certainly help to ameliorate any of that issue. Oh, and I also agree with the four-way stop. I think the roundabout would be crazy. It's really the pedestrians and the bikes that just go over to the trucks are kind of. the trucks go back to working out there.
Thank you. Oh, did you have a question?
Yes, I did, if I may.
Mr. Paul, can you come back and,
Sorry.
Councilor Anderson?
Yes, Mr. Paul, I wonder if I could ask about what are the prospects for capacity expansion at your site? Just considering the site and the space available, leaving infrastructure aside, I believe we've learned that you're accommodating over 200 persons per night in the busy time of year. What's the long-term prospect for increasing that, if that is something that we may come to, or you may come to?
Well, we're pretty much built out in our current structure, the way we're set up. We're pretty much as mature as the campground can go as far as adding additional sites. However, we are finding other ways to have additional capacity in the situation. I.e., the Constellation Festival is a very good example of that. Constellation Festival, we're going to have a lot more people on our site, and we'll have cars that will come in a different way. So this is another, there's going to be events or things like that that will bring even more people in. That's kind of an average. So there's no real room on the property itself to grow, but we do have the overflow area, which you can't quite see on there. Well, actually, you just see that little sort of an area there to the right of the purple. That's our overflow area, and we get 20 vehicles a night in there when we're busy as well. And we have all of our parking inside of our campground. We have 70 sites, but well over 100 spots for vehicles to park in. No question. I mean, up to 200 when we're busy. We're super busy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sherry, did you see your hand? Yep. Yeah, don't like the mic.
Hi, Robin Sherry, resident 40275 Air Drive. I'd like to just speak to Mampcom MRAS Campground. As camping is actually being reduced in our town, a town that needs more affordable camping in our area, the campground that MRS has put in place is much needed, and they've spent years working to put it in place. I strongly feel that funds should be committed to securing water for this location. This does a number of things. It increases health safety for our campers. It increases desirability for our road campers to stay at Mampcom River Access Society Campground and use the facilities, helping alleviate our camping bylaw and residential conflict. It also would increase wildland industrial fire interface fighting as our summers become drier, longer, and fires become more of a concern. There are 3 points of fire starting possibilities in the area from campfires, camp stoves, firearms, and Lafarge's industrial site. I strongly support the allocation of funds for the MRAS campground to bring water to this area, which in as much as a safety issue, a community and visitor issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Yes. Come forward.
Council. Michael Goditis, 38874 Buckley, and just another resident who strongly supports MRAS's ask. I think it'd be a great addition, and I think it's been covered how many issues it would help.
Thank you very much. Any other people that want to speak this evening? Okay, I'm going to go back to council and just see if council's got any questions. See a few, so I'll come this way. Councilor Race.
Thank you. I just want to be clear about the water decision. Are we expected to decide that tonight, or is that something that's separate from the rezoning?
I mean, through you, Mayor. Council could decide tonight where to allocate part of the CC contribution, or that could be decided later. How it's going to be, or what council decides to do with the contribution. Right now, all the money will come into the critical amenities fund, and then the spending of that fund will be on a case-by-case basis.
Follow up on that. I mean, is there any staff report required with that? Are there any issues that staff sees to one or the other?
There are some issues with extending the water line, issues related to best practices as well as ownership. Centennial Way, kind of once it goes past the development site, enters Crown land area. So there are always issues with trying to do things on Crown land. But we think that it is possible to bring it to where the Rod and Gun Club is. Going through the dike is more problematic for us because at that point we're putting infrastructure past the protected dike area.
But to be clear, I understood the two alternatives. Our obligation would be to bring it up to more or less the Rod and Gun Club driveway, and somebody else would go through the exercise of getting it through the dike or somehow over the dike or whatever. So, but as far as getting to the Rod and Gun Club, are there issues that really stand out for that?
No, that is, well, other than ownership, it's Crown land, so that adds a bit of a layer of complexity. It's not a property that we own as a right-of-way. But other than that, that's really a CAC allocation decision.
Last question. And when you say it's Crown land, is Centennial Way Crown land, or would we run it under the road? Is it a district road?
It's somewhat unclear. In our system, it shows up as Crown land and not a district right-of-way.
Thank you.
That's good. Councilor Pengil, any questions?
Yeah, a couple. So we're, I just want to dig into if we're talking about this water line because it actually relies on infrastructure associated with this development, or is it just we're sort of looking at this area so this idea is in our head? Like, if there's a $350,000 cash contribution proposed, but that could be spent anywhere, could come from any other development in the town, or is there a specific infrastructure piece to this development that makes this water line investment make sense?
Through the mayor, money for this could come from other places, but usually developments want to contribute to CACs in their neighborhood, and this is quite a unique opportunity of a large-scale redevelopment in the vicinity of the MRAS campground.
Then another topic, I'm just thinking about our climate emergency. Got less than 10 years to get our GHG emissions down 45% below where they were in 2010. And I appreciate that there's been a commitment on site too, but when I think, if we don't take that commitment across the whole site, what sort of burden does that put on the rest of Squamish? Because, we have to somehow collectively as a community, that's our target. So if we don't do it here, isn't that putting an additional burden on everyone else who already lives here? Andrew, I'm trying to think in sort of dollars and cents. What's the cost to us to retrofit or to incentivize people to retrofit by 2010 some of these units or all of the remainder to get us to that 45% reduction?
Through the mayor, may I clarify, you mean specifically using electric versus gas on the whole site?
Yeah, or not relying on fossil fuel. Yeah.
Right. I know at the second hearing that item was discussed, and what was discussed is that this application has been in stream for quite a long time, and there's been a lot of there's quite a sort of package that they're providing, and at the last meeting they stepped up and said that they would do the site 3 or site 2 as an alternative energy source, and I know at the second hearing it was sort of left at that.
But I think my question is more be that as it may, what's the cost if we don't do it now? Right? Because we have a short timeline to hit this target. And my understanding is it's much more cost effective to hit that target right now before everything's built. So what kind of costs are we incurring by not doing it now?
Mr. Valencius.
Through you, Mayor, we don't know the answer to that. We've been treating, sort of encouraging applications that are in stream to make efforts to advance the climate issue, but we haven't been putting it as a hard requirement. I think that it becomes much easier when it's a new application and everybody's aware of the changing requirements. So that's why we sort of with every application, push as much as we can to make some roadways in, but not a demand to go 100%.
I'm just going around because I saw a lot of hands.
Okay, thank you. On the can you go back to the two options on the water issue to keep that? So, I get that one option is less desirable and I'm assuming less cost than the other, but this $350,000 value, was that attached to any particular one, and have either of these options been cost, like, you know, or how does that relate?
I'm going to actually go to our CAO for a moment here.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. In speaking to staff, just to back up a little bit, our recommendation would be not this evening when council's considering third reading to make a decision on this water line right now. Staff haven't done a detailed costing of what it would take. Should the money, should this rezoning actually be adopted and the money goes into the critical amenity fund, council can, through that policy, direct the money to the water line, so the decision does not need to be made this evening, and staff would prefer to come back with more detail on the cost to allow council to make a more informed decision on that particular element.
Does that address your question?
That was a very thorough answer to my question, so thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Councilor French, any questions?
No questions at this point, thanks.
Councilor Stoner?
No, that answered my question.
Great. You're good? Okay. There were several comments about the roundabout versus four-way stop, and we concur with many of the speakers that the truckers aren't the problem. So when, are we going to continue to look at the design, or is this cementing a traffic circle into the rezoning tonight?
Yeah, well, Mayor Elliott, in answer to that, I didn't think we necessarily needed to arrive at a decision about this, but then when I was thinking about it, I thought to myself, well, when do we make a decision about this? I mean, we could include this as part of detailed design, so look at some more options. I mean, some of the things that we haven't actually established yet for this intersection is, as I described earlier, by the time we put in those right-hand slip lanes to actually accommodate truck turning movements, the intersection is going to have to get quite a bit bigger, even if it does remain as a four-way. Because I'm not comfortable with the idea of trucks having to turn into the left oncoming traffic lane to make their turns, which is what ends up happening when you have a small four-way intersection, such as it roughly is now that it's been realigned recently. Especially with additional traffic coming to the neighborhood. So that's my main concern, is safety. And the other thing that roundabouts do is that they do accommodate a greater volume of traffic, and they postpone, for a location such as this, probably indefinitely ever having to signalize it with an actual traffic light. I don't know that this intersection would get to that point. It's sort of hard to say where trends are going with driving. I'd like to think not, but so I think it probably is worthwhile to look at it in a little more detail in terms of the ultimate design of the intersection, both as a four-way and as a roundabout, to see how it looks and have more discussions, come back with a recommendation. I'm not quite sure what that process would look like.
One of the pieces of feedback we've had from the slip lane up near the Garibaldi Highlands Elementary School is that that's not working from a safety perspective at all for children. In fact, residents up there have been asking us to get rid of the slip lane. So we know that that's not necessarily the solution. But you don't have a drawing, do you, of a more detailed design of what this will look like for pedestrians and bikes versus the traffic?
Not at this time. There is lots of, I mean, I feel like that could be an entire conversation in and of itself, just to address that. Just another little interesting fact that I picked up when I was doing a bit of research on roundabouts is how much public attitudes towards roundabouts are always negative and very negative before they're built, and then they tend to completely 180 once they're built, if they're built properly and people actually really like them. So this is normal. This is what almost always happens when people propose roundabouts. And let me just say, with respect to former people who've worked here in the past that the commercial way roundabout is not a very good example of a roundabout. I rarely meet anybody who likes that roundabout, so, and I'll put myself on that list too, so.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Okay. So for the first time, I'll ask if there's anyone who wishes to make any further representations this evening on this rezoning. I see another hand. Yep, come forward. It's your name, address, whether you represent yourself or an organization.
Stuart Witt, good evening, Mayor and Council and District staff. I know everyone's talking mad
I'm
about...
sorry, our minute taker didn't catch your name and address.
Stuart Witt, 38148 Chestnut Avenue, Squamish. The roundabout is basically, well, a hot topic, obviously. The main issue I have with the design around that, with the development, would be that the east side of the highway is actually like a main artery from pedestrians and trail users, etc., gaining access to the north side of Squamish. It would actually be prudent to look at a walkway over the ground rather than a two-dimensional aspect as you've drawn on your drawing. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got to do this three times. So for the first time, is there anyone else who wishes to make any further representations this evening? For the second time, is there anyone who wishes to make any further representations? Don't be shy, we can be here all night. That's what they pay us to do. For the third time, is there anyone who wishes to make any further representations? There being no speakers, I would ask council if there's any further information that the planning department might provide in response to any comments or questions raised by the public, or anything else that is on your mind before we close off the public hearing. Councilor Stoner.
Just wondering if staff can speak to, I know this is covenanted in terms of protection of or replacement of trees that are important for bird habitat, but is there anything in there with regards to retention of existing trees, or is it solely what gets taken down will be replaced?
Through the mayor, we do have a arborist report that shows the existing trees. Quite a number of them are in the footprint of the proposed development, and with the Squamish, Squamish is a floodplain, so it's very difficult to retain the trees unless they're on the sort of the periphery of the proposed site. And certainly when the applicant applies for the tree permit, we will absolutely be looking at what trees that we can retain along Centennial Way. There's also the group of trees in the southeast corner will be retained because they're in the streamside protection and enhancement area.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to go, I have to, each time council asks a question, I got to go back to the public.
Oh,
sorry. No, that's okay. I've done it before too. But I'm just going to make sure, council, this is, I'm going to go back to the public and ask 3 times. So if you have any other questions. Okay. So, for the first time, is there anyone who wishes to make any further representations this evening? For a second time, is there anyone who wishes to make any further representations? For a third time, is there anyone who wishes to make any representations? Since I don't see anyone that wishes to speak and council's finished asking questions, please note that council members are not permitted to receive further submissions or hear either from the proponent or an opponent to the application once we've concluded the public hearing. So no texts, emails, hand signals. Any and all communication should be channeled to staff. So there being no further speakers, I declare the hearing closed. And thank you very much, everyone, for coming tonight and for commenting. I appreciate that. We will be entertaining third reading after our next application. Thank you so much, staff. So next up, we have DP 502, 38924 Midway. This is a DP with variances. So again, there's an opportunity for the public to speak. And, I will ask staff to present first.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Asia Philp, planner with the Planning and Infrastructure Department. And tonight I'll be presenting Development Permit 502. It's located at 38924 Midway. So this DP application is seeking to allow for the construction of 2 light industrial buildings. It's a cleared disturbed site that's located at the southern end of Midway. The surrounding sites are a mix of light and medium industrial businesses. There's a vacant site directly adjacent to the north. The OCP land use designation is industrial business. The site is zoned I-11. This accommodates a range of industrial uses. And it's also within DPA 9, which is established to regulate the form and character of industrial development. It's also within DPA 2, flood hazard, but it does qualify for an exemption. And it's within a flood hazard area, and there's no environmentally sensitive areas on site. So 2 similar tilt-up concrete buildings are proposed. The buildings are both single-story with mezzanine space above. The unit demising is unknown at this time, but it could allow for up to 14 individual units. The building tenants or businesses are also unknown. There's 4 variances that have been requested, and I will cover these later on in the presentation. This is the proposed site plan. For access, there's 2 vehicle accesses that have been provided. The first one is off the Midway cul-de-sac, and then the second is off a driveway easement that's shared with 38922 Midway to the south, and this allows for looping through the site. There's pedestrian access provided off the Midway cul-de-sac. It includes sidewalk improvements along the cul-de-sac, as well as connections to both of the buildings on site. And there's a ramping system that provides accessibility to both buildings as they're elevated to meet the flood construction level. For parking and loading, the vehicle parking exceeds the minimum zoning requirements. There's 46 vehicle spaces that are provided on site, and this works out to 1.7 spaces per 100 square meters of gross floor area. And therefore, this development could accommodate a mix of warehousing, storage, manufacturing, service, or repair uses. There's 3 loading spaces required, and 3 have been provided. The driveway design accommodates up to a 30-foot or a 5-ton transport truck. So the form and character, it's based on our basic industrial tilt-up concrete typology. We commonly see this through the business park. The buildings are detailed with a lot of windows and some exposed metal canopies that provide for rain protection. The northern and western sides of Building A, which is the more northern building, are shown here, and this is what would be seen from Midway. The western side features a large trellis which goes up the full height of the building. And this is the northern and southern facades of Building B, which is the southern building. And just to point out, the southern wall was entirely light gray originally, and the applicant had updated this to add additional color blocking to improve the facade through ADP's recommendation. So the proposed landscaping consists of trees and planting beds that are along the western Midway frontage. There's also a seated engineered bank that runs along the southern lot line and a portion of the eastern lot line. There's also landscaped islands that are provided through the parking areas. I'll now cover the variances being proposed. So the first variance is to reduce the side and rear setbacks for an accessory structure from 1.52 meters down to 0.19 meters. This is to allow for an external, fully enclosed and shared waste room to service the development. The waste room is 2.1 meters high and it's 22 square meters. It backs onto the rear access driveway of the multi-tenanted building that's located at 38921 Progress Way. And this back area appears to be just utilized for loading, storage, and for some waste bins. So staff are supportive of this variance. It maximizes the usable floor area of all of the units, and it's located away from Midway at the rear of the site. So the second variance being sought is to increase the maximum combined height of a retaining wall and fence from 2.44 meters to 3.42 meters. The higher wall and the fence combination basically results from having to raise the site up to meet the flood construction level, and then they wanted to put a 6-foot security fence on top of that retaining wall that meets the flood construction level. So again, given the medium industrial nature of the surrounding properties here, and because there's limited public traffic, given that the road is a dead end, staff are also supportive of this variance. So the third variance is to eliminate the requirement for a continuous landscape strip around just the northern and eastern portions of the property that is supposed to screen the parking lot. So this is highlighted in green on the site plan here. The landscaping is provided along the western public Midway cul-de-sac frontage, as well as the grassed berm along the southern boundary. And again, staff have leaned on the rationale that it's a medium industrial neighborhood and that full screening of this lot is viewed as potentially unnecessary and would reduce the footprints of the building, thereby reducing the amount of employment space achievable. So we're supportive of this variance as well. And then the fourth and final variance being sought is to reduce the requirement for landscaped islands to be located every 8 parking spaces. There's 5 landscape islands that have been provided, and essentially there's a 6th island that's missing that's highlighted in green on the map. And in regards to both of the landscaping variances, we think that they're aligned with the intended use and the vision for the southern area of the business park as a place for moderate and heavy industrial developments, and that these medium industrial locations could have reduced form and character standards that would help to maximize the amount of developable area and the employment space achievable. So the project as proposed meets the objectives of DPA 9 listed above, although some of the landscaping guidelines are not being fully met, and that's highlighted in the report. Staff reviewed the project and the requested variances with, again, that approach to balancing the competing objectives of maximizing the developable area while ensuring that the development has a positive impact on the public realm area. The project also meets the listed OCP policies, including maximizing existing employment lands and protecting our industrial opportunities. The proposal also aligns with these council priorities listed here by maximizing the use of existing infrastructure, creating new employment space in Squamish, and providing some active transportation links via the upgraded sidewalks along the frontage. DP 502 was posted to the district's development showcase. There were no requests for a public information meeting and no meeting was held. Variance notices were sent to properties within 100 meters of the subject property. One public comment was received, and it voiced concerns around the potential for future trespassing, also concerns around stormwater management and environmentally hazardous businesses moving in. So the staff recommendation is that council authorize DP 502, subject to the provision of bonding for landscape and the registration of the flood covenant, and that DP 502 include the variances covered for the accessory waste enclosure siting, the fence and retaining wall combination, and both of the landscaping variances for having a continuous landscape strip and the landscape islands. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Councilor Race?
Thank you. I want to, if you can go to one of the overheads, just talk about the fencing for a second. So that was the variance where there would be a retaining wall with a 6-foot fence on top of it?
Yeah, the highlighted, the red dotted.
Red, right. And in the report, the reason for that was for security. Raised up because of the FCL, but then the 6-foot fence was security. But is there not a fence around the rest of the property? Would that not also be required for security?
Through the mayor, I'm not sure if the applicant is here and wants to speak to their plan for fencing, but the seated bank is not proposed to be fenced. It's just a steep berm that comes up to meet the flood construction level.
And is that on the south side? Or the...
Yeah. That is, it's this area along here.
Oh, I see.
Yep.
And there's no requirement for fencing?
No, there's maximum height requirements, but there's no requirement that the applicant have security fencing. They can choose to fence or not to fence.
Okay.
Any other questions, council, before I go to the public? Yeah, Councilor Stoner?
I'm curious about the language for the 2 landscape variances. So for the third variance, we're eliminating from a continuous landscape strip to having absolutely no requirement for a continuous landscape strip. And then the fourth variance is going from 1 tree per 8 parking spaces to having no requirement for landscaped islands, but the proponent is providing landscape on the site. And so I'm just curious why we haven't used language that still requires some level of landscaping in those 2 variances as opposed to going to absolutely nothing.
I can speak to that through the mayor. So that's basically just semantics. I found it challenging to word a particular variance to make sure that they achieved this, but through the development permit, the site plans are attached to that permit and they're expected to build to those exact plans. So that, I think, provides enough security to us that the landscaping that they are proposing will be provided.
I appreciate that. I'm just concerned about setting a precedent. I don't want the business park to become a totally concrete jungle. I think the landscaping is important, and so I would be happy to craft some language that still reiterates the fact that that landscaping isn't actually being buried to zero, and we're still securing it through the agreement.
Through the mayor, I mean, we can change the DP language to have it be crafted more appropriately on the fly.
On the fly?
Yeah.
I'll go to another question. Councilor Pattengill, you can think about that?
Actually, on also the same topic, implications for policy 17.2D. When I read that, it sort of implies that we're intending this to be more knowledge-based, high-tech, rec-tech, that sort of thing. But it includes light industrial. The zoning allows for light industrial, which means it could just be a warehouse in theory. And so that's where I'm sort of hesitating on the variance or understanding what it is we're actually requiring, because in my mind, that outside space, that the zoning requiring those sorts of uses, then the landscaping we require, I think, becomes very important in terms of pushing that sort of use, making it high-tech, rec-tech workers who want to sit outside and so on. Then I think maybe the landscaping becomes more important. So can you just clarify what our expectations are around landscaping and are they consistent? Are they the tool we will use to achieve this 17.2D policy?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it through the mayor. So I think the variances are tied to the zoning. They're in the zoning bylaw, and they're quite a blunt instrument that is applicable to every industrial development across town, no matter where its location. And so those requirements would apply to also the rail yards or other more heavy industrial areas. So it's quite a blunt instrument that doesn't have kind of the flexibility that we might be looking for built into it to allow for some leniency or reduced standards in more of the moderate to heavy industrial locations.
But given 17.2D, does that imply then, notwithstanding the variance, our expectation is still going to be a degree of landscaping that is very appealing to a rec tech worker going outside and there's nice trees or bushes or it's a nice environment? Because that policy seems to imply we would expect something like that, and I'm not clear if we're allowing this variance if we're actually still getting that.
I think potentially just to build on what I heard Councilor Pennfield say and what I heard you say in your presentation is that this is a medium kind of industrial area, and yet then we're picking up 17.2D from the OCP, which suggests a different use than medium industrial. So there's a bit of a disconnect for council in trying to understand, is this supposed to be a medium industrial site, or is this site supposed to be for more high-tech workers that would expect a higher treatment of the landscaping around their workplace? So I think we're hearing two things tonight. We're hearing this is a medium industrial area, but now you're presenting 17.2.D, which is exploring a use that's not medium industrial.
If I may speak to that, I think policies here apply to the business park in general, and what we're seeing this area as is kind of the heavier industrial uses rather than elsewhere in the business park, which I think the intent is to have those sort of central and to the north of the park. This is going to be the heaviest industrial area in the business park.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm not sure why 17.2, I don't necessarily have an issue with that, but then 17.2D seems a bit out of place as a,
as a reference point?
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm not speaking about that. I can speak to the quality of landscape.
We're just going to get through council's questions first, and then we'll open it up for people to speak. Are there other questions? Okay, Councilor Stoner, and then I've got a question.
I also just want to clarify the zoning. So at I-11, but does this fall under the kind of temporary stopgap measures that council had put in for I-11 zoning in the business park with regards to restaurant and fitness center use? Or is that still available for these properties?
They're subject to the temporary measures, the I-11 measures that were brought in. So they need to abide by the I-11 zone as it stands today. And any future tenants coming in would apply for a business license and we'd review it against the current zoning.
Thank you.
I know we don't have the design of a solid waste storage. We don't have those parameters defined for industrial uses, but if we're going to vary our bylaw to accommodate this accessory building, do we have a confidence that at least it separates three streams?
Through the mayor, I can't speak to, I don't have the confidence. We have no technical specifications that say for industrial what size of waste room is required, and without knowing what potential tenants are coming in, the different demands for the waste room are completely unknown.
Okay, and can we speak to the uses that are allowed in this zone?
Do you want me to list the uses?
I think that you confused council a little bit with the policies we've got in front of us and also describing this as a medium industrial zone and then putting a building in front of us that looks pretty fancy for a medium industrial zone. There's no lay down yard, it looks pretty nice, so I'm conflicted in my mind about what we're building here and for what purpose, so it would be helpful to know the use.
Okay. So I'm going to list the permitted uses in the I-11. I'm not going to list the uses that would not be permitted, i.e. there's particular restrictions in a bunch of the uses that are listed. So I'm going to leave those out. So alcohol beverage manufacturing, heavy equipment sales, industrial fuel installation, light industrial, motor vehicle repair and service shop, nurseries, pet grooming, and trade contractor facilities.
Thank you. Any other council questions before I go to the public? Mr. Villeneuve?
If I could just follow up on one of the questions about the motion for no landscape islands.
Yep.
We could change the motion to locate a minimum of 5 landscape islands, which is what is shown on the plans.
I'm going to go to the public now. So the proponent and members of the public have the opportunity to be heard or present written submissions respecting the variances on DP number 502. So these are the variances related to the waste enclosure setback, the fence height on top of the retaining wall, the lack of landscaping, continuous landscaping strip around 2 sides of the development, and requiring only 5 landscape islands in the development instead of what's required in the bylaw. So, would the proponent wish to speak this evening? Or members of the public?
Probably yes, given the controversy about certain things and maybe.
So you just need to come to the microphone and say your name and address and then who you represent.
My name is Marco Ciriello. I am the architect of the project from the Studio Architecture. One of the aspects that have been touched upon is, in effect, that the zoning usually is a very blank, has blank statements and sort of mandatory, which in fact, probably from an urbanistic point of view, eliminates the flexibility of making certain decisions, given the context of a certain site, the location, orientation, and so on. One thing that in this case I would like to point out is that in effect we thought that it was very important to present the landscaping on the front. And we have provided very large and generous landscaping and fairly articulated landscaping facing the cul-de-sac. And we thought also that apart of the landscaping that it is the back of the property, the one that we just discussed that was sloped. So the proportion of landscaping that is on the site, given the fact that the site presents in a very regular, towards the cul-de-sac, a very regular shape and geometry, resulted, as I said, in much more inconsistent landscaping because the areas, not being only a mere strip around the site, but represent a substantial mass in relationship to the front. So that is one aspect that I would like the council possibly to consider, the fact that in reality we didn't eliminate completely the site, we just relocated the landscaping. We just relocated the landscaping in areas that we thought that were important. The mass is also another factor. Everybody knows it from an ecological point of view, if we are talking about insects, birds, and so on, the mass of the landscaping is very important in order to allow for these species to utilize the natural environment. For what regards the parking, I would like to point out that in effect the island that is eliminated is on the back of the building. So in effect it's a very inconspicuous location, and I believe that it affects the appearance of the building at the minimum. There is another factor that relates to environment. The maximum use of a site actually tends to eliminate pressure from the rest of the site. The maximum ability of buildings to house the maximum number of uses eliminates pressure from the rest of the environment because it requires less building. And so, considering all these factors, we find that probably the strip of landscaping, considering the pros and cons, in effect represent undoubtedly a loss, because nobody, if the landscaping is there, it's there. If the landscaping is not there. But considering the pros and cons of this loss, for what I have said, I think that the pros are more overwhelming in relationship to what is the loss and the cons. So this is what I have to say on this topic.
Is there anyone else that wishes? Oh, do you have a question? Sorry.
Excuse me, sir.
So, excuse me.
Oh,
Just
sorry,
one question.
sorry.
I didn't notice. Council Rice has a question.
Yeah.
Thank you, and it's about the fencing. Is there any reason you wouldn't continue the fencing down the rest of the east side and along the south side for security reasons?
Well, we thought that the part of the landscaping on the south side would have been a nice addition to the building. All we need to do at that point is to close. If we look at the lower part of the fencing, all we need to do is to return it to the building, and the building itself would represent, in effect, a barrier to access the rest of the site. We didn't do that. We didn't receive direction from the client to do that. Maybe it's something that he should consider to complete the security. We will be discussing it actually after this meeting. We don't need, in fact, to continue the fence behind the building. Just at the lower part,
right.
We return it against the building, and that's with the gate there.
Right. If I might, but on the front, on the street side then, what's to prevent people from just accessing that bottom part of the site right off the street?
There is an aspect of setback that has been considered here, in a sense that the boundaries between public and semi-public realm is very important to define those boundaries. We felt that between the ramp, because we have to consider that at the edge of the site there is a ramp reaching the required elevation of the building. The ramp, it's a good indication that in effect that is not a public anymore. And also the landscaping define very well at the front what is public and what is semi-public. There is a ramp, an handicap ramp, so if there is the transformer, there are the bicycle storage. So in reality, the entrances of the two buildings are very well defined. And so we thought that in the fence at the back, it's actually the part that needs to define the boundary between the other side. It also has to be considered when the other side will be developed, they will be required to reach fundamentally the same height. And so once that happens, then really there will not be any definition between at the property line. And so this is looking at now and also looking at the future.
Oh, do you have a question yet?
Yes, if I may. The advisory design panel has raised the issue of whether for the for the walls on the, refers to the back, but growing wires for vines is a possible opportunity. I'm not sure whether that statement may come from your team or a question from the advisory design panel. Could you speak to that prospect of, so to speak, decorating the walls with vines?
Certainly it is a possibility. We thought that articulating the wall with color would have been enough in that sense. So we chose, because that was in fact one thing that was mentioned that the design panel is not. And so we thought that that was good enough to really achieve what the design panel had in mind.
I see. Second question, if I may. You've discussed the fact that we have that the future tenants are at this point largely unknown, and there could be a variety of scenarios. I keep a rough idea of what types of business that may be displaced in the future due to our OCP vision. And a lot of them are businesses that do repair work. They handle oils, engine oils. I wonder if that is a special consideration that would need to be taken into account, whether built to suit or modified to suit for your facility, because I come up with about 14 businesses, just very easily off the top of my head, that are going to have to move sooner or later that do handle engine oils. They're truck or car or vehicle repair shops.
The client will be very happy to hear that there could be potential in that building. However, usually when a tenant improvement it's asked, then those they have to include an oil interceptor in their plan. And so at that moment, they will deal with that particular aspect. And so an oil interceptor will be actually provided by each business.
Is it still a question for this gentleman or to staff?
Perhaps it is to staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Continue, Councillor Anderson.
Yes, I just wondered whether there has been a traffic analysis consultant brought in to advise on the 5-ton truck access. Is that something that's been reviewed by a professional?
Through the mayor, the question was put to the applicant, and their response for the 5-ton truck was an email response. It wasn't from a consultant.
Thank you.
I want to go back up to the public. Is there anyone in the public that wishes to speak? Yes, sure, come forward. Just your name and address and whether you represent yourself or a business.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Ann Hansen. I live in Vancouver.
You can stand up and it will pick you up, so I don't want you to be uncomfortable.
4147 12th Avenue, Vancouver. I'm the owner of an adjoining property, actually, 38919 Progress Way, which is the ICBC Claim Center, which is just to the east of where the building B is going to be on the drawing there.
So can you put up a drawing that shows the adjoining properties? So the ICBC is
to the east, and it's the southern.
It's my cursor's over.
Okay.
So just along the lines of fencing, I wanted to just take that further with security to a trespassing issue potentially. My preference would be to have fencing like all the way around, because there are popular shops on Progress Way such as Tim Hortons and Wendy's and a liquor store. I see potential for trespassing across the ICBC building in that case. I don't believe there's good sidewalks down Midway, but there's a sidewalk down Progress Way to those shops. And I just want to make sure my tenant continues to have peaceful enjoyment, quiet enjoyment of the property, so that's one issue. And just to make sure that surface water management is well managed, because I understand this property is going to be higher now than our property, but I understand there's bylaws in place for that, so hopefully that will be well respected, as well as any environmental concerns that if shops to go in there that are potentially going to have environmental issues, that the bylaws are well respected as well, so the properties don't suffer from that. So, and I also want to just make sure that my interpretation is that Building B will not be part of the variance. It doesn't come closer to adjoining properties. It was just the one thing in the corner. Is that right?
It's the waste
The waste, okay.
Just the waste.
Okay, thank you. That was all.
Thank you. Staff want to comment on just overall how we see people moving through this area and how it evolves, whether we put fences around everything or whether we actually do want to achieve some sort of permeability?
Yeah, and so through the mayor, just to provide some context, there is a sidewalk that runs from the corner of Industrial down to partway down Midway. That's currently in place. And then these two properties to the north are owned by under one ownership, and we've been in the pre-application stage with them for a development. And through those designs, there's a connection proposed kind of from Progress Way through to Midway. So I don't think we anticipate that somebody would go through the back of the property and cut through to get up to Tim Hortons. There will be a sidewalk fully connecting all the way through to Industrial Way in the future.
Any other questions? Let's go back up to the public. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak to this DP with variances tonight? Okay. Any last questions?
So I just want to have this discussion a bit, but our sort of expectation is simply I-11 at this point, or are we really more hoping to drive towards that tech, high-tech sort of this area?
On the rezoning, Council Pangale, it's a DP.
Yeah, and I guess I'm trying to understand the variances though.
The variances around landscaping and fence heights, and they're not varying the uses, so it's not a rezoning, it's a DP. Sorry. Any other questions? Okay. Council, we did get some language from staff to change that last one. Did you have a question, Councilor?
I was just going to suggest some language for changing the third variance as well, where it currently reads a variation from be screened by a continuous landscape strip not less than 2 meters wide, densely planted with shrubs and trees at least 0.9 meters in height at the time of planting and located at a maximum distance of 10 meters. And the current suggestion is that gets varied to have no requirement for continuous landscaping. And my suggestion would be that we include that language from the first bullet point, but say for street-facing sides of the property, they be screened by continuous landscaping. Does that make sense? Because it's still, all the landscaping is being proposed on a street-facing component, right? So it still captures the essence of what is being proposed, but yeah.
Is that suitable language? It's very hard to vary DPs on the fly.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I would just add potentially public street, just to clarify that it's not internal kind of driveway accesses.
So for public street facing sides of the property?
I'm just going to check in with our minute taker. Do you understand the direction we're going here?
Yeah, so including language for public street facing sides of the property.
That they be screened by continuous landscape.
So we keep all of this.
Keep the rest of the language.
Add the language that. Do you feel that's supportable, staff? Because
you can push
I
back.
did hear from staff that what's in the design drawings is what gets built. And so if you're telling us we can make these verbal changes, then that's going to be okay with the proponent, and we're all on the same page.
Yes.
So you're good with those changes, okay? Councilor.
Thank you. So I take it we're going to try and vote this as one package?
Yes.
Okay. So I would also like to suggest a change, well, it's a small one, change to the variance for the fencing to have that fence connect to the northeast corner of building, I think it's building B, the southern building. We call it building B,
Correct. Yes.
as the architect suggested.
So just to clarify, let me pull up the site plan. So the fence ends here, and what you're proposing would connect it to this corner,
Right.
the northeast corner of Building B.
Yeah.
I'm looking to staff, so
I think on this one, for you, Mayor, it'd be good to check in with the applicant, just because that is the changes we talked about previously are not changing anything to the motion, whereas this would actually change the plans. And we, whenever we do that, we have to make sure that the applicant is agreeable to that.
Came from the architect, that's where I got the idea from.
If I may speak, the client has agreed with it.
Even a gate?
So to put a gate, to put a fence, it makes absolute sense. Sorry. So,
Yeah, yeah, fire and yeah, and also for landscaping. Yeah. It has to be, yeah.
staff will need to propose some language then.
You say
Do you
I
want to
don't
recess?
well, my suggestion would be that that gets included just as a separate, as a condition to be added into the permit, not incorporating it into the variance.
I'm happy to take a few minutes in recess if you'd like to confer.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's
Probably
take
good,
a 5-minute recess. That'll give council a break. We've been sitting for a long time and we'll figure out the best way forward. Okay, thank you everyone. We're back in our regular business meeting. Thank you for your patience. I think we have a direction on the fence issue.
So through you, Mayor, what we propose then is subject to condition in the motion. So there's 2 subject to conditions now, one for bonding, one for flood hazard covenant.
Yes.
And the third would be that security fencing be extended to the southeast corner of the southern building. And so for egress purposes, the fence can't just come across the north end of the southern building. It has to incorporate that sidewalk that runs down the eastern edge of it.
It's a fire escape.
So there's a sidewalk along this eastern side of the building and an exit that comes out of this corner. So the fencing would run parallel beside the sidewalk and then connect to the building at this southeastern corner.
Complicated things, Councilor Ennis.
Whatever.
Go ahead.
So to be clear then, so there's 2 things happening. So one is requiring a fence as described, and then the variance is for the height of the fence. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes.
Because of the retaining wall.
Yeah, because, yeah, there's so one is a basic requirement for a fence, so it could be maybe a 2-foot fence without a variance, possibly, on top of the retaining wall. But if we're having the retaining wall and a proper 6-foot fence, which is what the report talks about, and that's the variance part, is the height.
Correct.
Simple?
Okay, so council, to move this forward, the motion will be to move the first variance unchanged, the second variance unchanged. The third variance would include the wording from the from statement, but would then add on the street facing, the public street facing sides of the property. That would be the third variance. And the fourth one is to locate a minimum of 5 landscape islands. And then there would be a condition appended to this to provide, and I think you'll need to provide, did you get the language for that?
for the subject. I think I got that.
subject to security fencing to be extended to the southeast corner of the building.
Of the southern building.
Of building
B.
That is what would be moved, Councilor Pendo.
I think just on the island plan, understanding, I'm just making sure we're being clear enough, is that it's 5 islands with trees. So 5 islands as they're described.
Are there trees on the island, staff?
Trees are actually not on the islands. And I'm wondering if the landscape architect would like to speak to that, or...
They're the landscape
architect
islands.
wishes, pardon?
Sorry, the requirement in the zoning bylaw is for landscape islands.
No, they're for trees to be.
It says
on
locate a minimum of
islands.
1 tree per 8 parking spaces located on islands. And Councilor Pettengill is saying, do any of these 5 islands have trees on them?
The 5 islands do not have trees, they only have shrubs.
Okay. Councilor Herford?
Thank you. As we were debating how to vary that language so it better represents the islands that we're getting, I was thinking of adjusting the ratio so it lined up with the 5 islands that we got, but I missed the fact that we're also losing the trees out of those islands. So is there rationale? I'm assuming there's some rationale to that. I get the losing the square
Okay,
footage.
let me ask the landscape architect to come forward and answer some of these
We could
questions.
gladly add trees to those islands.
Do you want to just comment? Can you speak to the rationale for having shrubs on the islands and
We weren't aware of the tree requirement on those islands. We can gladly add trees to the island. That would not be a problem. There's plenty of room in each of them.
okay. Do you have another question?
Well, I was going to suggest. Oh, thank you. That's great. I think to capture that, maybe we just adjust the ratio in the language around the variance. We went to 0 from. Sorry, I'm scrolling through. Just whatever that ratio would work out to, so we get treed islands, or if we just add including trees to that variance. I don't.
1 tree per island.
1 tree per island.
Yeah, we could just add with 1 tree per island at the end of that.
Sure. If that's the simplest way that gets us there, that's fine. I was thinking just adjusting the ratio from the initial calculation, but I think they both get us there. I think they both get us there, so I'm happy.
Someone want to move this?
I will.
Moved by Councilor Herford, seconded by Councilor Reyes. Anybody want to speak to it? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We are now able to contemplate third reading of the zoning bylaw amendment for the CD zone, Centennial Way, number 2529, 2018. Mr. Valencius, there was a suggestion by council that one of the subject twos is a covenant on the electrification of the townhomes, and do we have standard wording for that? Or how would we phrase it?
I think that for you, Mayor, we don't, to have a covenant is not necessary. There's going to be already a number of covenants. The land development agreement is going to be one of the covenants, and it will deal with a whole number of securities in this development, so we would just include it in the land development agreement.
I guess that we seem to, I guess I would question why we do it, or why we've done it on the other projects and why we wouldn't do it here right now.
Premier, there's not always a land development agreement. So some of the other projects have been development permits, so where you have to have another covenant essentially, whereas land development agreement is kind of a catch-all agreement for bigger projects. So it would be just as safe in that as it would be as a standalone covenant, and would be less administrative effort for the district.
Council, you have the motions in front of you. Moved by Council Rice, seconded by Council Stoner. Would you like to comment on your motion?
Sure. So, this development, as you heard the proponent speak, has been being worked on for about the last almost 4 years now. And it has evolved significantly from when it first came to council. And I commend staff and the proponent actually for responding to council concerns and comments throughout that process. It has, for me, several very positive aspects. It will be a neighborhood node. I think it will be the first one we've created since we decided we wanted to have them, and this has been the first opportunity. And I think this is a great place for a neighborhood node with the recreation facilities, central location, transit service, slightly off the main highway but close to it, and with adequate walking and recreational trails close by. It also provides a diverse array of housing forms, which I think is another one of our goals, and so that for me is another positive. There will be road upgrades to that area, which are not yet finalized, and I'm not going to express an opinion one way or the other about a four-way stop versus a roundabout. I go through roundabouts all the time now. It just adds a little bit of excitement to my daily commute, but I'm not going to opine in that. This land use zoning is basically land use, and the details like what a road looks like or an intersection and so forth are, I think, a little bit farther down the line. One of the things that was initially contentious, I think, for many councillors when it came to his last term was the fact that the southern part of the property was replacing or being built on what used to be employment lands. Notwithstanding that it was a campground where there was actually very little people employment. However, it was potentially employment lands. And part of the evolution over the last few years has been adding more employment possibilities to that site. The point now where, as one speaker stated, I think now there is a healthy balance. And I think it's also realistic for this area. As you look at some of the overheads, you can see how it's a relatively refined area close to the intersection with Loggers Lane. But as you go farther east, it becomes more and more heavy industrial as opposed to light industrial, and kind of transitions away to it. And so I think this is a good place for this type of light industrial and commercial. There are a few outstanding issues that we heard from. One of them is the four-way stop or roundabout issue. Another is the water issue. And I tend to agree with the advice we got from our CAO that this is not the moment to make the decision. And I was a little concerned about that actually as we were in the middle of the discussion. It's not a small engineering project running a water line, particularly one that has sufficient capacity for fire flows up Centennial Way, and so I think we want to have a really good handle on that before we actually did make a decision. I will say though that I am leaning that way unless there's some real obstacle, not just to water, but to water with a hydrant for fire flows, because as you look at the overheads and you see and think about the evolution of that area, there are industrial and other complexes up there. There will be probably more in the future. And so extending the fire protection farther up Centennial, I think, is a positive thing for this development. The final point is the discussion came along at the end with gas versus electric. And this came up in a council meeting we had before, and I started to think about it afterwards, and I take the point about the different impacts on GHG emissions between gas and electric. On the other hand, one of our priorities is affordable housing, and everything I've heard about it is that electric is much more expensive on a monthly basis than gas. So there clearly are trade-offs, and there's a bit of a conflicting set of priorities there perhaps. So I think before we get too far down that road, I think it's worthwhile to have a council discussion on that, which we haven't had, and I'm not proposing we have it tonight, to try and decide how we want to deal with that issue. But I'm satisfied with what's proposed here tonight, and so I will be supporting this motion, my motion.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Stoner, and then I'll come back to Councillor Candale.
Thank you. I too will be supporting this motion and the rezoning. I do think that this has put us in a really good balance of what it is that we're looking for. This is a prime location for a neighborhood hub. It meets many of the OCP policies that, that we're striving for in this community, and many of the components around Council's strategic plan. We're looking to build walkable, workable neighborhoods, and that is what we heard from the proponent. We have just over 28% of employment space in this land, and that is something that we need in this area. And so very happy to see that extent of employment land in these spaces, let alone the other amenities that are also being put forward with regards to childcare facilities and the affordable housing components. These are all things that our community needs yesterday, and so hoping that they get built quickly, especially since in our council strategic priorities, we have 125 affordable purpose-built rentals that need to be built by 2022. And if some of these units that are in the first phase of development can slip under that timeline, that would be great to see. But hats off to staff and the proponent for working through this. On the other side of things, I am cognizant that we are rezoning what is camping space and prime location for camping space, which is a really critical amenity as well in our community. And cognizant to that, I do agree with my fellow councillor colleague that there is a continued discussion that needs to be had around water servicing along Centennial Way and what that looks like, but I'm not prepared to have that conversation this evening. I think there's more due diligence that needs to happen, but happy that that money is being set aside and will be earmarked for a further discussion at another point. So I will be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pettengill, then Herford, then French, then Anderson.
Thank you. I will not be supporting this. As I said, I think at the last meeting, I actually really like a lot of things about this development, but we are in a climate emergency. We've made that declaration as a council with specific targets, and as identified, I think that was the thing that was important to me to get this over the hump in terms of the burden on getting this done. I don't see that as a significant burden in terms of getting this development completed, and I am concerned that the $350,000 cash amenity, one way or another, we're going to end up spending that and getting any fossil fuel infrastructure out fairly soon if we're going to meet our targets. So, that's a real challenge for me. I do generally like this project, though, so I would encourage the proponent to voluntarily consider this step, and this is something we all have to come together on somehow. I take staff's point that it's not our normal practice to switch things in stream, but this is not a normal circumstance, I think, and affordability doesn't matter if you don't survive, and that's kind of the reality we've got to wrap our heads around it. I don't think we quite know how to do that yet. So we'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I'll be supporting this. I recognize that previous councils and already a few times with this council have worked on this project, and I've been impressed with how responsive it's been and how the project's evolved over that time. I think it does move forward a bunch of our OCP objectives with the creating that neighborhood node. When this is fully built out, there's going to be a lot of services there. It's going to be very walkable. It's right on our core transit network. There's so many things here that make sense. I think we still have some work. It's already been covered a little bit tonight. There is some additional work to be done with the design of the intersection, and as the options were presented to us, we still need to understand how much of a footprint we have there to work with, and there's some more work to be done there. And similarly with the water line, although in general I'm supportive of getting water down there, but it's easy to be supportive of things before there's a solid price tag associated with them. So I definitely want to make sure we do our due diligence there, and before we commit ourselves. So thank you for all your work. I'll be supporting this one tonight.
Councilor French?
Thank you. I really see this process for the developer as more of a marathon than a sprint, and I acknowledge the flexibility that we've seen on this project and the adaptation that has taken place over the years that this effort's been underway. What I see is a great mix of housing forms, employment space, and trails and access to nature in this area. Resident feedback has been, I think, constructive and productive in this process, so I recognize the folks who have contributed in any way to making the project better through the consultation that's taking place. I will venture to offer an opinion about the intersection. I believe we have a traffic circle education issue more than a safety and driver issue here. Having lived in close proximity to a traffic circle for many years, I see that a lot of people don't really understand how they're supposed to function, both as pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers. And I'll leave it at that. I support this motion. I'll be voting in favor. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson?
Just to quote Mr. Carlson, we've been working toward a vision for a neighborhood node. And there's a lot of diverse elements here, lots to learn. We will learn from very unique integration. And we will also, I agree with Councillor French, the roundabout, if that's where we're going to go, will be a learning opportunity and a necessary one. I'm satisfied with the additional building on the Site 1 as a solution to the interface with the streetscape for passers-by, a high visibility corner, and also the truck route. And finally, on the water line, I believe there's more cost information, in particular questions I have on costs anyway, scenarios before we pursue that. But clearly this is an evolving district, and it has always been seen to be one that's evolving. There'll be new investments up that road that maybe will require water as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be supporting this. I appreciate staff having the ability to see this through two councils. It's never a favored task by any planner is to see a large rezoning like this over an election period. So you guys have done a remarkable job. I think it's come a long way because it had to come a long way from where it started. And I'm pleased where it got to. I'm excited by the daycare use and protecting housing for daycare workers. That's so important given the crisis in our community. Affordable housing is in the first phase, which not a lot of developers do, so I appreciate that. I think the mix of uses for the commercial and light industrial space is going to be very exciting to see what wants to evolve in that area. I think this is going to be quite a vibrant hub for our community because it is built around a Brennan Park that will get revitalized one day. But it's such an important gathering place in our community already, and then how our corner evolves over time as well, I think is very critical. I love the car shares, the 3 cars that will be there, and I do hope that some of them are placed at Brennan Park because I think that would be meaningful to the community. I take my fellow councillors' point about the climate emergency. You know, I think that we're going to have to lead with incentives to get more developers to go in this direction. And eventually, because all buildings need to be net zero ready by 2032, the market will dictate that this is the direction that people want to go. And I don't buy into the more expensive because by next January, we're building to step 4 for residential. And that makes your house way more efficient and less costly. So I'm glad the developer is going this direction, and perhaps by the time they get to the subsequent phases, they'll see that the market is starting to shift as well about what consumers are looking for in their homes. So I'm happy to support this. I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Pettengill opposes. Carries. Okay, so we have a few readings to get through. First, 3 readings of the District of Squamish Housing Agreement bylaw for Buckley Avenue. So,
Good evening, Mayor.
There's a staff presentation.
Sorry?
You do have a presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
What's that? Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Elaine Naseby, Community Planner, Jonas Velaniskas, Gary Buxton. This is Housing Agreement Bylaw number 2710-2020. This is for the affordable housing project on Buckley Avenue, which is a partnership between Sea to Sky Community Services, BC Housing, and the District of Squamish. This is an image of the affordable housing project. It is a 5-story building. It's located in the Dentville neighborhood, just north of the existing high school. On December 3rd, 2019, Council authorized development permit number 525. Issuance of the development permit is dependent on the adoption of this housing agreement bylaw. Affordable housing is a critical issue in the community. And Section 483 of the Local Government Act grants the authority for local governments to enter into housing agreements. A housing agreement can only be entered into by bylaw. The units secured at 38648 Buckley Avenue would be governed by the following terms. All 76 units are designated as affordable. It would be managed by Sea to Sky Community Services Society. The housing agreement does not regulate rent levels and eligibility criteria. Those are established in a separate agreement. The housing agreement is necessary in order for the project to qualify for an exemption to the district's development cost charge bylaw. For Council's information, all of the 76 units are mixed income housing. They're all below market rent. Of the 76 units, 50% will be rent geared to income, 20% will be deep subsidy, and 30% will be affordable market rentals. The apartment sizes are based on BC Housing's design guidelines. All of the units are considered as affordable rental housing on the housing spectrum from the 2018 District of Squamish Community Needs Assessment. It's hard to see on the screen, but that's the middle column. The middle blue column is the affordable rental housing. So in terms of policy, the creation of affordable housing meets policy in the 2040 OCP related to residential infill, affordable housing, workforce housing, and purpose-built rentals, which all meet a critical housing need in Squamish. In terms of council priority areas, it maximizes the use of existing infrastructure, places density close to downtown, and provides local employees with secure, affordable rental housing. The staff recommendation is for council to approve the following resolution, that the District of Squamish give the first 3 readings to this housing agreement bylaw. Thank you.
Any questions, Council? Okay,
Just a quick one, and I had the same one actually for the previous, and I forgot to ask it, but with these rezonings or housing agreement bylaws, these sorts of things, is it prudent or possible for us to add a clause that sort of state that if we gain the ability to have emissions requirements as a municipality to deal with the climate crisis, that and amend them from time to time, that those will become binding? So just to avoid grandfathering and so on, just sort of looking to the future.
Through you, Mayor, not in the housing agreement bylaw. the housing agreements strictly deal with the tenure of the units.
Any other questions? Someone would like to move that? Moved by Councilor Stoner, seconded by Councilor Ricker. Any other comments? Call the question, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is the 2020 to 2024 five-year financial plan. Mr. Russell, do you have a presentation tonight? Or
No, I do not.
so just any last-minute questions?
Any last minute questions? And just a quick question while I'm here. Is there a magical way for me to push a button so that people don't want to watch all those icons? They don't have to? I know better than closing the screen because
Yeah,
that'll
don't
get
go-
me in deep trouble.
I don't know if we can do a blank screen.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. My name is Roland Russell. I'm the acting manager of financial planning. I am here before you to ask for you to give 3 readings to bylaw 2736 2020, which is our 2020 through 2024 financial plan bylaw. The highlights I would like to say is council went through an extensive review process of many steps and iterations to review both capital projects, special operating projects, general fund spending, utility fund spending, and we reached many compromises and decisions through that process, and as a result we have the financial plan bylaw that is before you. Some of the highlights, I would note that we are anticipating water rates of approximately 4%. We are looking at solid waste residential rates that vary between 0 and 3.6%. The landfill disposal rates are somewhat higher, averaging just over 10%, primarily as a result of completion of the vertical wall and repayment of the debentures associated with that capital project. Furthermore, we are recommending an increase in overall general fund revenue of approximately $1.45 million. That is a 4.9% increase. We are anticipating an increase in growth, which we hope to offset approximately 2% of that. And so our best estimate at this point will be an approximate 2.9% tax levy increase for residential properties. I should note that we will be coming back to you in April with a tax rate bylaw, and the delay is based primarily on the fact that we need to wait for BC Assessment to finalize their assessments for 2020, and they will be available at the end of March. As a result of that, we will be bringing forward a tax levy bylaw in April to complete the overall approval of both the budget and the tax rates to fund said budget. Before you have a bylaw that we are asking 3 readings for. If you have any questions or additional direction that you would like to provide to administration, I'd be happy to take those comments at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Councilor Pena.
Just want to clarify the growth thing. So I think it's been in the news a bit, the claim that we've actually shrank in population-wise, and I guess there's some concern that may just be the way the counting has changed. But in any case, I take it that wouldn't impact the budget because that's based on sort of properties and so on, and that has only gone up, and so that's why we're still assuming a growth that will take us from 4.9 to 2.9%.
That is correct. We have seen preliminary numbers from BC Assessment. We are comfortable on the basis of those numbers that our original estimate of approximately 2% growth will come to fruition in 2020. I would not hazard a guess beyond that to try to be more specific as to what the final numbers will be. I would prefer to wait until we get the final assessment values at the end of March and then present the true facts at that point in time. But all indications are at this point, based on the preliminary assessment, that the growth estimate that we had forecasted for Squamish will in fact come to pass.
Any other questions? I have one maybe through to Mr. Buxton. In Schedule B, talks about our different revenue sources and compares them to the BC average. It's on page 128. But developer contributions, Squamish is 5.72%, and the BC average is 14.27%. That's a big disparity, given we just did a rezoning. And I'm wondering what are those DCCs or those CACs or what is under those numbers?
I don't know.
Okay.
What is under those numbers is this. These numbers factor in use of developer contributions to fund various capital projects. And so what we are seeing here is a result of the fact that a number of capital projects that are DCC funded have been delayed. There are also a number of capital projects that are DCC funded that are not within the direct control, let's say, of the municipality as far as timing. And so, although there are quite a few projects that have significant DCC funding components associated with them, I'll use the wastewater treatment plant as an example. This is a fairly significant project. We don't anticipate that project will go forward until 2023 or 24. So as a result of that, the DCC funding associated with that would not be included in these calculations. So
Okay,
that number's going to go up and
purely
down.
DCC money, and we spend that money when growth requires it. So.
Yes.
Okay. Fair. Thank you for clarifying that. Any other questions? All right. Someone want to move our 5-year budget?
Yeah.
Moved by Councilor Stoner, second by Councilor Graves. I'm going to slow that time, Councilor. Any comments? Let's see this go through. Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next up, District of Squamish Fees and Charges Bylaw, number 2716, 2020.
Hello again, Mayor and Council.
It's like you never
I was going to say I'm back, but I haven't actually gone anywhere yet. So there are two parts to this bylaw, or two components, I should say, to this bylaw, and I will address the first component first, and then the second. There are some housekeeping aspects required of this bylaw, and that is due to the fact that, in fairness, we missed some things that were asked to be changed, and so we're coming forward now at this point asking for corrections. So there's some minor wording. There was some fees and charges associated with printing was a page that was missed inadvertently. There are some changes to solid waste, some wording around disposal items at the landfill and the such, and we brought those forward to correct. The more significant item within this bylaw is there was a joint effort between finance and planning department to coordinate the language within the water and the sewer bylaws to be consistent, more consistent with the wording within the zoning bylaws. And we were doing that in an attempt to align planning's desire to move forward affordable housing and with the fees and charges assessed to various housing types within the water and the sewer bylaw. So as a result of this, there's been a change in accessory dwellings have been moved from the rate of single unit rate to be similar to the secondary suite rate. It results in a reduction of approximately $220 annually for the cost of these units. Although it's not significant, we believe that it is potentially providing some additional incentive to people to develop these types of units and to perhaps make them available on a more affordable way. So we hope that this is showing a number of things, one being joint work between various departments, cross-functionality, and also desire of the departments to move forward council's stated goals of providing more affordable housing. It also helps to address the definitions for short-term rentals and allows for consistency between those, and that also would thereby increase costs for short-term rentals. Again, another function that we hope will promote longer-term rentals here in the community. So with no further ado, those are the adjustments that are being requested with respect to this bylaw amendment, and I would put it to council to ask any additional questions as required.
Thank you. Also, any questions? I have a general question. Mr. Russell, how come Schedule 23 on the water rates and then the Schedule 24 for sewer rates, how come the uses don't line up one for one? Like why do we refer to certain types of business in one, but they're not reflected the same way in the sewer? I'm assuming they've both got a sink and a toilet, but they don't seem to line up, those two schedules.
To be fair, Mayor Elliott, I didn't design the schedules and I inherited them, so I'm not quite sure why there seems to be some discrepancy between the two. Part two, we are moving forward with metering, and so I believe that in short order, we'll replace a number of these schedules with simple, straightforward metered rates and no longer have these areas where they're not in alignment. I hope that answers your question somewhat.
Entirely, because it's weird that we don't have the same uses just detailed in each schedule. But I do understand that we are moving towards metering, so that takes care of the water one. So, until we get there, that's just odd to me. But I'm not going to force a big work project. So
Thank you.
in advance, so
I appreciate that.
meter. Council, any other questions on this? Okay. I'm going to move first to readings. By Councilor French, second by Councilor Anderson. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for staying with us. Next up, under Community Planning and Infrastructure, we have the 2020 Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant applications. This is for 3 projects. This morning.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Jesse Morwood, Capital Projects Manager here at the district. Tonight presenting on the 2020 Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant application, and I'll be quite brief, hopefully. Staff right now is putting together an application for active transportation grants. These are grants from the BC government. This grant was formerly known as Bike BC, which some of you may know. The name's changed because what the grant is funding is actually the increase in scope from last year. So it's not just bike infrastructure, for example, it's sidewalks, it's other types of infrastructure. In order for this application to be complete, we need a council resolution, which is why I'm here tonight. We're applying for 3 different projects. All these are vital projects for the district active transportation plan. We're also applying for 3 just to give us a better opportunity of getting the grants. Also, the grant funding increased this year from the BC government, so there is a hope that we can get more than 1 grant from the government. The 3 projects that we're applying for is the Pemberton Ave bidirectional bike path, the Clark Drive Corridor Trail, and the 3rd is the Government Road Multi-Use Path between Depot and Axon Road. This brings me to the resolution that the District of Squamish authorized staff to pursue these 3 active transportation infrastructure grants.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Councilor Stone.
I'm just curious, the staff report states that the grants can cover up to 60% of the project costs, but in the budget breakdown, it says that we're only looking for $150,000 in the grant application line.
Yep.
Which doesn't account for 60% of the total cost.
Yeah, great question. We had to put these numbers for the grant application. We had to put the numbers into the budget in September. At that point, we didn't know exactly which grants we were going to be applying for. So certainly the value of all these projects is more, but we took a kind of a best estimate in September what we may be applying for. So our hope is that we can get at least 1 grant application, which would be 60% of one of these projects, which would hopefully be about $150,000. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if we're successful in all 3, is that more than $150,000, and can we still spend all that money?
Yeah, so no, we can't. We can spend up to $150,000. However, we could use the money for next year to subsidize our active transportation program. So the funding would be from the government. It wouldn't necessarily be from other district funds, if that makes sense. We could use the money next year to subsidize our funding program.
The grant funding?
District funding.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Yes. So how much money are we asking for through the grants?
We're asking for 3 projects. The total project value we're still working on, but it could be upwards of $750,000 for the total project. So $375,000, let's say, $400,000.
And if we're successful for the $375,000 in grants, can we spend all that $375,000 in grant money?
Yeah, through the mayor, sorry. No, we can't. What we do is like I said, when we submit our budget submissions in September, we have to put a number. We cannot overspend one of our project funding. So if we get more than $150,000, I think that'd be a success. But we'd have to wait until next year to spend it, whereas we have to put it into the 2021-26 financial plan.
Thank you.
Councilor Trevor, then Councilor.
Thank you. The staff report under project information had some conflicting information. At first it says staff proposes applying for 3 projects, being Pemberton Avenue, Clark Drive, and then Discovery Trail connection at Industrial Way. And then when it went into the description, the Discovery Trail connection Industrial Way was swapped out for the Brackendale Government Road connection. And I remember last year when we looked at these, when it was Bike BC, we were looking at improving those intersections, Industrial Way and Centennial, is that the next one? And we felt that those were a priority at that time. And I was just wondering how we've sort of reprioritized that, and apparently during the report writing portion. So sounds like it was a close call, so I'm curious the rationale.
Yeah, through the mayor, thanks for the question. Yeah, sorry, there is an error on the report. Thanks for pointing that out. We are still planning on doing the Discovery Trail connection to Highway 99 this year through the Active Transportation Program. So it is still a high priority project to do this year, as well as these other 3 projects. It was a last minute deletion from the application. We did apply last year and did not get it. So we had 3 other good candidate projects. So we thought these projects have better opportunity to get the funding than this. So that's why it didn't make the list. However, we do plan to do it this year.
Thank you. And I was curious, there's a weird pinch point that we're all across from Sunny Chivas, and I always feel like that is something that should be a high priority. And how is that something that particular piece something we're looking at addressing to our active transportation current budgets, or is that something that we need some backup on and we'll be targeting with grant funds because it's a substantial piece to address, or?
Yeah, through the mayor. We are planning on addressing that this year as well. The Ministry of Transportation in, I don't know if I'd call it a grant, but a kind of cost share partnership have agreed to give $60,000. So we're working on design right now. We're finalizing the final work there, and we do plan to do something. We are planning on basically taking away some of that rock slope. There is challenges because there's private property and there is a massive hydro tower right there. So we are looking at widening it. It's not going to be 3 meters as we'd like, but it will be better than currently it is.
Not to go down this rabbit hole, but we started, so.
Still not an excuse.
Well, but we're here. On that one, an issue has been the snow removal and the use throughout, because that small gap that's there fills up and we can't get our equipment through there. Like, we're not getting to 3 meters. Is it enough to get our small plow through there to keep that piece working? That's going to be.
Yes, that's the objective. Yes, it will be. Our machine will be able to get through, improve sight lines, and it will widen the trail.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good rabbit hole. Okay, Councilor Anderson.
Yes, I'd like to address the Clark Drive Corridor Trail proposed project. It is one of 3 intersections that does not have an adequate merge lane. And I'm referring to Garibaldi Way northbound, Cleveland southbound, but also Clark entering Highway 99 northbound. These are long-standing discussions. My question is, because I know it'll come up among my neighbors and people who use this intersection, Valleycliff and Hospital Hill, it has before during the highway upgrade and also during the extension of the corridor trail to where we have it today. People are asking, why can't we put a merge lane here? Is there enough room to design a merge lane? And you may not be, this may be for other colleagues in your department, but could you give a little bit of an explanation on that issue?
Through the mayor, sorry to clarify, this is a northbound merge lane onto Highway 99?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, my apologies. I'm not involved in that project. It's I believe Dave Merrow is the project lead, so
yes.
I'll defer to him on this one. Apologies. Sorry, I don't know the answer.
Well, then I'll just make the point that this will be an issue for a number of residents, I'm sure. There is, to quote the text from the discussion of that intersection, currently there is a gap in the existing corridor trail from Clark Drive to Highway 99. There is also a long-standing discussion as well. There's also an east-west connectivity gap between Valleycliff Hospital Hill and schools. We actually still do not have a safe, convenient pedestrian trail down to the schools and downtown from Valleycliff. And that's a complicated issue because this goes through the Scott Crescent development and there's certain moving parts there. But I raise it as an issue because I know my neighbors will say, we're going to spend here some money on Clark Drive, which doesn't solve our problem, our east-west connectivity problem. It still is unresolved after a decade and a half. In fact, the corridor trail itself had an information meeting and a task force, and it was raised at that time, that's 14 years ago. We still do not have an east-west pedestrian trail that is completed. I just raised that as an issue, and I'll just finish up by suggesting, and considering those points that I raised, is that we may, in terms of public engagement, there's a reference to a direct mail out to Hospital Hill residents. I would suggest that really that it should include Valleycliff residents as users of this intersection. And I believe that we really probably should, because the current web page for this Clark Drive Highway 99 intersection project does not yet, and I know that staff are at work on this and will be addressing it, but it does not yet offer any information on the east side of the intersection and the upgrades, including this corridor trail component that's there. So there will be a demand for public information surrounding this project, and I guess we'll direct in future a question regarding the merge lane to your colleagues, whether that's been a consideration, whether it's been measured out. But this, I know from looking at ICD statistics, it's in the top 6, that there's bumper crashes there, and it comes up every year. But that merge lane is a long-standing conversation for intersection users. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilor Snow.
Can I just clarify that the Discovery Trail Connection Industrial Way will be completed this year? We're just not submitting a grant application for the work, correct?
Through the mayor, that's correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'll move the recommendation.
Moved by Councilor Stoner, seconded by Councilor French. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We're moving on to our consent agenda. This is minutes, correspondence referred to staff. And so if you want something pulled, you need to pull it now. I'm pulling letter 2 and letter 5. Councilor Beck.
4 and 8.
4, 8. Okay. Those letters pulled. Does someone want to move the consent agenda? Moved by Councilor French, second by Councilor Hertzberg. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So we'll deal with those letters in number 12 after the action requested. So we've got correspondence action requested from S. Frick about the Highlands Way North speed concerns, that be referred to the Director of Engineering. Moved by? Question? No, you're moving it.
I'm moving, I'll speak to it.
Okay, moved by Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor Stoner. I knew there was something in your eye there. Okay, Councilor Ray.
I was getting psyched up.
Yeah.
No, I actually had a conversation with Mr. Frisch and went out and drove around and looked at that intersection, the area around Highlands, Deerwell Highlands Elementary. I think we all know that has been a consistent and persistent complaint of the residents around there. When we had the PACs at council chambers here several months ago, it came up then again. And in fact, Your Worship mentioned it tonight, with that slip lane, there's nothing really to slow people down and they just blast right through. And so I agree with the recommendation that it be referred to the Director of Engineering, but when I was thinking about this, I didn't want to just go there. I wanted to get something back. And what I'm looking for is some recommendations on short-term and long-term fixes. And I don't know if there is a short-term fix. Long-term fix, to me, a layperson, not a traffic engineer, looks like quite a redesign of that intersection. Take out islands and do all kinds of stuff. So I wanted to get something back that we could start making decisions on to go forward. And I'll just ask Mr. Buxton, would 1 month be a reasonable time to get something back from staff, do you think?
In terms of a preliminary response?
Preliminary scoping, I think, is sort of the answer. Not detailed engineering or anything like that. Won't hit this year's budget, I don't think, in any event, unless it's relatively minor.
Yes, we can likely have something within a month in responding to these issues raised. The resolution of some of them is not a month, The resolution is a lot longer than that, so.
Understood.
Yeah.
So,
So the correspondence from Mr. Frith, he referred to the Director of Engineering, and that a preliminary report come back to council with potential short and long-term fixes.
within 1 month. That's okay with the second.
The committee of the whole for planning and engineering items is the second Tuesday in the month. So I don't know that we would be able to get something back to you for the second Tuesday in March, which is this long. It would probably be the second Tuesday in April.
2 months.
Just a question. Will we be reviewing the Safe Routes to School again this year in that list, or is that not on the horizon?
Sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Will we be reviewing the Safe Routes to School components?
I believe Ms.
And
Dunn has already sort of established the priorities for that. I believe she has for 2020.
But we can bring the conversation back pre-school year if you'd like. So we can make a note for the agenda planner. Because we do want to try and keep it front of mind and make sure that RCMP have back to school speed blitz planned, all those sorts of things. So we can put that on the agenda planner. Okay, so you moved it. And we had a seconder? Yeah, Councilor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We had a letter from S. Martin concerning a concerned taxpayer regarding the fire hall, that this be referred to the Senior Director of Community Services for response. Moved by Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor Stoner. All those, do you have a question?
No, I was going to jump in.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. I believe that Councilor Pettingill has a conflict on the next one.
Yeah, so I want to declare reasonable apprehension of bias. Mr. Noble is my direct employer and manager.
If you want, Chris, you can just slip in there. Okay, so unfortunately, this email was sent to the wrong email address and didn't get to our staff in time. So, and it was an incorrect address, so it didn't get to anybody within the district. So, hence the ask for a grant in kind. This is all space rental, is it not? There's no cash. To come from council contingency. Moved by Councilor Herzog, second by Councilor French. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Someone open the door for Mr. Pettingill. There's a letter from N. Van Uyten about a resolution in support of the White Citizens for council consideration. You can move receipt, you can move a motion. Councilor Race.
I'll move receipt.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councilor French.
I know, and there's others that are going to be spoken to tonight, but I am concerned about taking a position on this particular issue. It's obviously very topical in this country, but it's a very, from what I understand from media reporting, it's a very, very complex issue. It is, from my perspective, having followed it now for a while, a governance issue. Unfortunately, that particular issue, which is internal to the Wet'suwet'en nation, has been sort of hijacked by some other people with different agendas, and so off we go, and it's gone off in different directions. But I was watching a news clip the other night of Ellis Ross, who's a former senior councillor for the Haisla Nation and now MLA for Skeena. And he was addressing the legislature on this point, and he was berating politicians who had made political comments about this particular issue, calling them divisive, in some cases disrespectful because they don't consider the other side, those who are taking a different position on the issue. They don't consider the other 19 First Nations who have taken a different position. And so he was really telling them to stay out of it. And in fact, his words to his fellow politicians were, you should be ashamed of yourselves. So I think it's a very dangerous thing for us to get involved in. I know there's some sympathies on either side with issues like this, but this council and municipality take a position on something like that, which from my perspective is basically internal to Wet'suwet'en Nation, I think is the wrong move. Some First Nations have resolved the issue of who makes decisions in their traditional territory. The Squamish Nation, for example, and I didn't know that until I heard it. But clearly the Wet'suwet'en haven't, and there is obviously an issue of who makes decisions for what within that traditional territory. And so I'm not sure that we should take a position one way or the other on that. So I've just moved receipt as opposed to taking any other action.
Did you want to speak to
Yeah,
him? I'll come over to you, Councilor Pettingill, and then Councilor Action.
I was motivated to second the motion, fully consistent with what Councilor Rice has shared.
Councilor Pettingill.
Yeah, I may have a follow-up motion if this passes. But, you know, I think Mr. Ross is one of a few Indigenous members at MLAs right now, and just almost as he is saying, there are different perspectives even within the legislature. Mr. Olson has had a fair bit to say about this issue too, and I think there's a lot, as you mentioned, many issues going on here, and you know, in terms of which nation is right or wrong, I don't think that that's our place to say right now, but in terms of as a, do we feel comfortable as part of a colonial government, a colonial system, using armed force to impose a certain, to impose our decision on the Wet'suwet'en, who by the Supreme Court have jurisdiction over these particular lands. I think that particular piece is something that is worthwhile probably taking a stand on, having an opinion on. And so I think it is important to be very clear about which piece we are weighing in on. But I think the way that is settlers we have proceeded when there has been a dispute is not at all appropriate. There are other ways to resolve conflicts. These are problems that have been created over a very long time, and we shouldn't be rushing to our solution with armed forces. But I will leave that for now and maybe come up with a public resolution.
You want to explore Councilor Anderson?
Yes. In the during the early 90s, I worked for the hereditary chiefs of the Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en, and indirectly with their band councils. And I caught up with one of my friends, a Gitxsan hereditary chief, just the other day. Got an update on activities. He informed me that just in the last couple of months, they have signed a benefits agreement with the Prince Rupert Gas Pipeline Project. They have asked a conservation group to leave their territory as they are trespassing. And they have sent a strong letter to the RCMP regarding their conduct on Wet'suwet'en lands, their neighbors. That's a lot of complexity and a lot for us to understand so far away. So for that reason, it's just, there's so much potential for real interference. So we're just too far away from that complexity, and I would not be comfortable in supporting any kind of a letter from this council.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate all the perspectives that have been shared. I won't be supporting the motion. Appreciate that it is a very sensitive and complex issue that we're speaking about. To me, it is about the piece that I think that does need to get pulled out is around the use of RCMP force on hereditary land or unceded traditional lands. And the component there that I think does actually come back to our municipality is a further letter that we had in our consent agenda from from Minister Farnworth that will redirect RCMP, potentially redirect municipal RCMP forces to that area if required to do so. And so I think it does potentially have an impact on our municipality and how our forces are deployed within our community. And so from that perspective, I would be supportive of writing a resolution to some extent with respect to reducing, or with respect to not allowing RCMP force to withdraw Wet'suwet'en and hereditary chiefs from their unceded territory.
Thank you. The complexity of this issue can't really be overstated, so I'm always hesitant to wade into the specifics. If we back up to a point where the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, we can maybe remind a potential letter could reference such things and remind them the province of responsibilities under that, or something along this line. Obviously what has happened up there and the images coming out there is not something that we want to encourage or we want to see ever again on anybody's territory. So I'm happy to have a discussion about what stand is appropriate to take on this, but it's a complex discussion, and getting to somewhere where we can, all of us can agree to that. I'd be curious to see how far out we have to zoom to get to that. But I certainly don't endorse the actions that have been taken to date. So I don't know how we get to have that next discussion, whether that's supporting this motion so we can go on and someone can make another motion, or if we defeat this and use this as our point to move forward. So I'm curious to see what anything Ember has to say about this.
I also know that Councilor Pagano has pulled 2 letters out of the consent agenda to talk to as well, one of them related to this issue. I had the honor of serving the province on the Environmental Assessment Committee implementation of the new act that is now in force. But since May of last year to December of last year, served on that committee, and during that time was asked to step over and attend some meetings of their Indigenous table around implementation of the new act. And what I learned through that process is the old act was deeply flawed. And hearing those Indigenous voices, which did not always agree at the table, you could see the complexity that different nations look at things differently and have different governance structures and have different ways in which they want to express their rights and title. So I think the way we have done things, the process that approved this pipeline was likely deeply flawed for many people that were involved. But you can also see that there is support as well. I think, as everyone's mentioned, this is complex. And I think it's worth, one, understanding how a similar situation would or could be handled within the nation's territory that we sit on. That would benefit all of our learning, to engage with Squamish Nation on a conversation around what happens if or when and how that works within their government structure. But for me, I think the important thing is to consider how we consider how our RCMP get deployed to do these things. I think we should consider the resolutions that we want to put forward related to Environmental Assessment Act and the climate crisis. I think there are things that we can proactively do that continue to help shift the dialogue in the right direction. These things should be solved through dialogue and not through force. At the same time, if you're not on the ground and not talking to the players, I think it's very difficult to pass a motion that walks that line. that is balanced and reflective of the complexity of the local situation. So for that reason, I will support the motion to receive. Call the question, all those in favor? Opposed? Councilor Pettengill, Councilor Stoner opposing. Motion carries. So, I see your hand, Councilor Pettengill. Do you want me to go to you now, or can we go through the other correspondence?
It doesn't matter really. Either way.
Is it related to the letters you pulled, or separate from?
It could be related to this or the letters, either one.
Okay. All right, so I'll do my letters, and we'll go to your letters.
Sorry, one other thing. I noticed the port community letters do end up in the table of letters, and so I did want to pull those.
You're right, they're not on the agenda. They're definitely in our printed agenda.
Yeah, they're in the package, it's just not in this table of contents.
Do you know the letters we're referring to?
I think there's 3 resolutions from the port community.
There's one resolution repeated 3 times.
It is repetitive, but
Do you know what page it was on?
189 is where they start.
Pardon?
Page 188 is where they start.
188. So, did you want to pull those?
Yes.
Do we pull them? How do we do that? Do you want to pull the letter from Fort Moody?
If I can.
All of them?
I wanted to deal with them as one, too.
Okay. So we'll pull the letter from Fort Moody. So I pulled Kay Miller's letter about the foreign buyers tax. And the reason I pulled it is because she actually asked for a response. And so I feel like we should refer to staff for a response. But also, the last council did take that approach, which is a wait and see approach, and it's never come back to council. And so I think it is actually time for us to put this on our agenda and take a look at it. I know through LMLGA, you approached the minister about this tax, not specifically for Squamish, but whether she was making any revisions, and so I think it's timely. So one, I'd like to refer her letter to staff for response, and then also work with staff to put this on an agenda for a future committee of the whole. That's my motion. Seconded by Councilor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The second letter I pulled was from Jay Hinson about municipal EV infrastructure ranking. And Squamish was near the bottom, saying we've taken little or no action on EV infrastructure, which I didn't think was quite accurate. But anyway, I want to refer the ranking to the bylaw rewrite to make sure that we are playing in the right realm. I don't want to be at the bottom of the list. So refer that letter to the bylaw rewrite. Second, I'll move that. Seconded by Councilor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. So, Councilor Pettengill, do you want to deal with City of Fort Moody first? Just maybe provide some context for what the motions are.
Yeah, well, so when I read these, and these come to us from time to time, and this is accelerate just before or after UBCM or LMLGA. And I wondered if it made sense to kind of have a process where, unless it's urgent, we kind of compile these and deal with them every quarter or every 4 months. So do you like to put some thought to these, and when they come sort of ad hoc, it's a little bit hard to just find the space to really think through. It just seemed to me to make it might be more efficient if we had a block of them every few months to kind of go through and see if we want to do with it. It's just a bit of my thought.
So a process change?
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, Council? Some of them are time sensitive, some of them aren't. Some of them are just to alert us. They're like FYIs, this is what we're taking forward.
And I suspect Port Moody, I didn't have time to check, we're going to send us the ones, or this might not be the correct ones. Because I know they're working on a number of resolutions for LMLGA.
So my inclination is to put them on the agenda as we receive them so that there's timely response. But if there's others that would like to respond to Councillor Pettingill's ask. Councillor Sonia?
I would say I'm happy to have them come forward as we receive them. I think if it is something I want to dig into a little bit further and we don't have the time, we can make a note of it and bring it forward at a later date. But I would rather just see them and take them forward.
I like them appearing as they have been, but I see that some of these, as Councillor Pettingill says, are time sensitive and maybe require some more thought or investigation before we actually do something. So one of the actions we can take at that point is refer it to some policy discussion or something at a committee of the whole at some point in the future. So and that's not an action we've really considered it when we felt that way. So I can see that being useful, but I think having them come as frequently as we receive them is important.
Yeah, that's always an option. Councillor Pettingill is forward a motion to refer it to committee of the whole for discussion and find the time on the agenda to do that. So, you need 4 votes because other people may feel differently about some of the resolutions, but whether they deserve a deeper dive by all.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just wanted to sort of test you on that.
Yeah, it's not there. Okay, so we'll move receipt of the Port Moody letters. Moved by Councillor Pettingill, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Then you've pulled both the letters related to Coastal GasLink pipeline injunction.
So, given the...
Do you want to speak to them together? Or
yeah, I can speak to them together, I think. Or, given the previous discussion, I think this has been really upsetting for everybody, how this has played out. I think it is important not to be silent. But I do take the point that we want to be thoughtful about what we say. And I found it incredibly valuable with some of the reconciliation sessions we've had here with staff. So I would like to propose that the CAO organize one for us, possibly with staff at your discretion, to help us think through what a constructive response would be in the wake of all that. And so it's part of potentially coming up with an appropriate resolution, but also just helping everyone assess where we are as a community and how we can relate to this.
clear motion? Okay.
So I guess a brief motion is to let the CAO organize a discussion similar to a reconciliation training to further learn about and discuss the West Web events.
Councilor Pettingill, as you're formulating a resolution for clarity, whole group of settlers talking about this issue. I'm not sure Deacons are learning.
Well, we've had an Indigenous facilitator with those trainings, and so I'm hoping that as part of the planning for this, that we bring that expertise to help us to guide us through, is my intent. So it's not that this is just a group of settlers and we're putting this together.
So your motion is that the CA organize an Indigenous facilitator to host a discussion?
More, I would say, an appropriate facilitator. Which would likely be Indigenous, but I don't want to presume that.
So right now, the motion reads that the CA organize an appropriate facilitator similar to reconciliation training to further learn about the Wet'suwet'en events.
I think it's more to, so what I'm trying to articulate is something along the lines of the reconciliation trainings we've had, facilitated by someone who understands, who can help guide us through that, to help us process and come up with an appropriate resolution. I think we did have four of us at least that thought some sort of response might be appropriate, but were unsure about, didn't want to do that improperly or in a way that was harmful. So I'm suggesting that we get some guidance on that and some help to sort of talk through that in a constructive way, so that if we then at the end of it decide that yes, it does make sense to make a statement, to articulate that it's done in a constructive way, and to help people, I think, process all of this. And I would suggest that it might be appropriate to include some staff, given that staff have been involved in some of the reconciliation training today.
We need a concise resolution to work with, and I know that I think you're trying to coalesce it. Is there anyone that can offer some suggestions to their council colleague at this point? Councilor Riggs?
Well, I'm not sure that anybody has all the answers to this, frankly, that could facilitate something like that. I mean, I'm no expert on it, but it seems to me that the whole country is kind of learning day by day how to deal with this, partly how to work within the United Nations Declaration. There's even a little bit of debate about how that actually works. Who has a veto? Does anybody have a veto? Etc. There's a whole bunch of stuff there that I think it's one of these things that, like some other piece of new legislation, you kind of let it chew through the system for a while and you kind of see what comes out, and then you start reacting to it or tweaking it or whatever you have to do to it. I don't know that you find anybody, and as I said, I'm not an expert in Indigenous relations, but following the media reporting, there's a variety of different First Nations governance models. The Squamish, for example, I found out on the CBC the other morning, Ms. Hillen was there, they had a referendum in the early 70s which determined that the elected council would speak for matters in the traditional territory period into statement. So they've got it nailed. They don't have this issue. But there's, I don't know how many First Nations in BC, and they're all different. And so I'm not sure that there's any value for us actually worrying about a First Nations reserve or First Nation that's 1,000 kilometers away, because when would we ever deal with them? Maybe we should be more focused on the one that we actually are living in the traditional territory of. If we want to start working on relationships, here we are at home and we've got a First Nation. So I don't know, it's just, I'm not sure you could ever find any way to sort of give you some silver bullet and this is the way it's got to be done. Because I don't think anybody in the country really has a very firm grip on that right now.
Okay, so I saw your hand. I'm going to hear from some other voices. So I'm going to go to our CEO first, and then I'll ask to Councilor Hereford and Councilor Anderson, and then I'll come back to Councilor Plango. This is an opportunity for you to listen and take it in or formulate your resolution for that.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. I haven't yet or recently updated council on plans going forward for 2020 and onwards around our work on UNDRIP as staff and council. So Michelle Nahani, who most of you have met either through the decolonization workshop or the council to council meeting that she facilitated, I reached out to her and she has offered to work with me to start looking at how as an organization and a council we can continue this work. Because really even in terms of general reconciliation work as an organization and as a council, we don't have the answers. And she's been very gracious and will work with me on that. We had a telephone meeting about 2 weeks ago, meeting again in person mid-March. And she ideally, my hope is that she can help me launch further works. And then we're also talking about working out a research type position or contract, and to focus primarily on our truth and reconciliation efforts and work with our exploitation community members. So our eyes on the ball as staff, including council as well. So just to provide you some idea of what we are working on as we have this discussion.
Herbert.
Thank you. I think that the governance issues of First Nations go well beyond what we really, especially ones so far away, to Councilor Race's point, are quite removed from us. But what isn't to me is the treatment of peaceful protesters, and that piece, without even another context, is problematic for me. Like in mind that it's First Nations territory, it's unceded, all that stuff, which is very important too. So I think it's worth saying something, but this is where earlier I said I don't know how far down to the specifics we can get to say something. But I'm not comfortable being silent. I'm also not comfortable wading into an issue that I don't know that much about, and is heavily nuanced. So I'm enjoying the conversation as we go around here to figure out where that space is, but I think it can be slightly more removed than, I think that Councilor Pringle is going very deep and specific to the heart of that specific issue. When we come back out a little bit, it's the use of RCMP resources forcefully against citizens. Or protesting peacefully to that, I think is, I think we can all be in agreement upon.
Councilor Anderson?
I would agree that there's some general issues for us to be apprised of and to educate ourselves about. I just wanted to, however, to pass on some information. One of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs used to be a school teacher in this district. And very recently is Herb George Satsang. And Herb George just gave a seminar in Mount Currie just within a couple of weeks ago. And I'd wondered whether the SLRD may have had a representative there, but it was for an open presentation on First Nations governance issues. He is in fact the past president of the National Center for First Nations Governance and is currently a senior associate for the Center of First Nations Governance. And Herb George is very familiar with our part of the world. And so I suggest that that organization, which may have a website or contacts to the north of us at Mount Currie, may be able to get some useful information as background materials to pursue some research, if you like. Their presentation may well be available. Herb George is a very well-known public figure, and I'm sure would be very accommodating to any information requests.
Thank you. Your other alternative is to refer yourself to a committee of the whole. We are going to be talking about our LMLGA resolutions, and while this may not be an LMLGA resolution, if you would like more time to consider the words for your motion and take the feedback of your fellow council members away and consider it, then that's an option available to you. But I will return the floor to you. You did have your hand up.
Thank you. So yeah, I will have a couple comments on that. I think I have another shot at something. So I just want to be very clear that I am not at all suggesting that we try and weigh in on who's right and who's wrong. This is about, in terms of Indigenous peoples, this is about a statement, are we uncomfortable? What do we think about when there's a disagreement? What are we comfortable with? And I think that's where there's a lot of discomfort that I think most of us agree on, possibly, but given the discussion, it's still worthwhile having someone to facilitate that. And Cal Salem was brought up. I follow him quite actively on Twitter. One of the things, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, the other day he mentioned is basically how good it felt, the outpouring of support for Indigenous rights and what's going on to Indigenous peoples today, and that he often didn't feel valued growing up, and so people standing up is very important to him right now, and that's a very common sentiment I read amongst a lot of Indigenous people. So, I read a lot of agitation too, and settlers especially try and weigh in on who's right and wrong. But I think people are also looking for people to stand up for justice and for fairness and for a peaceful resolution to things. And so I think having someone help guide us through that and help process what's going on would be useful. So I will attempt this. Resolve that the CAO organize a facilitated session for council and staff to understand and develop a constructive response given recent Wet'suwet'en events. And we want to speak to that in a second.
Is there a second?
I'll second it for discussion.
Second by Councilor Stone for discussion. Councilor Pettingill.
So I think I've covered most of it, but the one you're asking to change I think is constructive response given recent Wet'suwet'en events as opposed to a response to the events. So sort of acknowledging that this is the impetus for the discussion, but we may not respond to that specifically. But I think it is useful and important to have a discussion about this, and I agree that I don't know that we are well equipped to have this discussion for ourselves.
Councilor Stone.
Although I appreciate where my council colleague is coming from, and I think we are all trying to grapple with how we handle this situation, and especially as elected officials, I think there's an additional layer of just trying to sort this out in our own minds. I won't support the motion, though. I think what we heard from this council in our previous motion, when we're addressing another piece of correspondence, is that there was not support to make a statement on this event, and then a statement of support at this time from this council. And so with regards to using our limited resources that we have for reconciliation and our council contingency, I would really like to focus that on how we better build our relationship in this corridor with the Squamish Nation, the Lillooet Nation, and our neighboring nations, and really do the homework that we have here in our backyard, in this amazing unceded territory that we operate in. I would recommend that if you feel really strongly about this, then perhaps considering a different resolution to bring back to council on this particular matter for further consideration, with regards to a statement of support or just support for the Wet'suwet'en people, but at this point I'm not willing to support the resolution itself.
Thank you. Councilor French.
Thank you. I appreciate where Councillor Pettingill is attempting to take us, and I note that since our election, we have had some really great training, access to training and learning, and specifically the Village Workshop Series with facilitator Kathy Camilleri. I found extremely valuable and definitely ties into the issues that are under discussion now. And I also have a great deal of faith in our Chief Administrative Officer in guiding us on these issues, and specifically around reconciliation. We're in an ongoing process around reconciliation, and I'm comfortable with the track that we're on there. And as Councillor Stoner pointed out, I completely agree that our focus is best on our relationship with the Squamish Nation and the neighboring nations. Focus on issues that are in our region, while keeping an eye on those bigger issues around the province.
Thank you. Councilor Bird?
Thank you. I see the potential parallels to big infrastructure pieces, potentially controversial big infrastructure projects that may be considered in the city sky. I think having a discussion around how, and using this as a catalyst to start having those discussions with ourselves and with our potential, as this feeds into planning, and how we would expect and direct our CMP to the extent that we can in our area. I think there could be a valuable opportunity to have those discussions. So I'm happy to commit some time to that. So I'll support Councillor. I think it's an important subject, and whether we end up responding specifically to this, or if this is a catalyst for discussion, which I think has great value as well. So I think that I think it's a conversation worth having, and I think we can. There's some learning to be had here, and I think we'd be remiss to miss the opportunity to have the discussion, given the potential impact it could have on our community.
Any other comments? I appreciate the conversation deeply, and reconciliation is very important to me, simply because I have, not only because, but my younger sister is First Nations, and I've watched how our systems do not create a fair playing field and discriminate, and have robbed her of a connection to her past. And so this is very personal work for me, but I believe that, as my colleagues have said, we need to work on what we can work on here. We have so much more work to do on our pathway to understanding the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and our work as a council. We have more to do around truth and reconciliation. We've just started with our decking project, and I think we can be leaders, but we need to stay focused on the important work we have to do here. And with always remembering that we need to be influenced by larger events outside the district. But I don't want to take us off the path that we're on. And I do think this is a catalyst for learning, but I want to do that learning in conjunction with Squamish Nation and figure out a path forward with them and through our ongoing conversation about truth and reconciliation. So I think this is good information for our CAO to take away in conversations with Michelle Nahaney about how do we incorporate some of these broader themes into our learning going forward, and how do we do that alongside Squamish Nation. So I think this is fruitful input to your conversations. But I wouldn't want to set aside just time to talk about this. I think we need to talk about our whole approach to implementing the UN Declaration, our whole approach to truth and reconciliation in a much broader context, and not use this highly charged event that we are all going to learn from as the sole purpose for community. I think there's a much bigger goal here that we want to keep our eye on.
To that end, to be specific, we propose to have I'm curious to see what the perspective of our First Nation partners are, as you know, what the learnings are from their perspective, and how do we capture that? Because that's the intent of my support for this. Is how do we keep moving and keep learning and plan, as I said, particularly with the incoming infrastructure potential projects. don't want to lose that. Are there specific actions besides this one? We should be talking about?
I believe it's through our more wholesome program and through our one-on-one meetings with the nation, government to government. It's very difficult to identify a short-term action, given that it requires the participation of the nation and may have capacity issues. And I believe they too may also be grappling with this issue. So I think there's a time and place, and if we can raise it at one of our future meetings, I think we should build our understanding. We shouldn't shy away from these conversations because they are full and of opportunity to learn and understand the complexity from a different perspective, not just the one sitting in this room. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Anderson, Stoner, French, Marriott, Councillor Race, opposed. Motion fails. Thank you for bringing it forward, and thank you for the conversation. I think it's important to have the conversation, regardless of whether the motion was successful. Councillor Pettingill, this was an important conversation, and we'll keep having more. So thank you for doing that. That deals with, so do we move receipt of those letters then? That Councillor Pettingill pulled? Yeah. Move receipt of the letters, moved by Councillor Ray, second by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have recommendations for committee of the whole, February 11th, to endorse option C for the new dike alignment for the Eagle Viewing Area and Station Reserve, and that the team complete for the recommended work as described in February 11th report to council and evaluate the feasibility and viability of this option.
No, I was trying to move it.
Moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And that from the Garibaldi Springs discussion, that we received the February 11th report and about the Garibaldi Springs Park design with feedback from council as discussed. February 11th. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none. Motion to receive the final Public Arts Select Committee meetings. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much to that committee. They're serving our community so well. There are no in-camera announcements. Any open question period clarifications?
Sure.
Stephen Chu, the chief. Just a process question. I was curious to know when the decision about the roundabout and the water might be made regarding the Centennial Way development.
In the future.
Will it be like an adoption where it's publicly viewable, or?
No, through the chair, no. I don't have a timeline, but it's unlikely to be an adoption. It's likely to be closer to the point at which we actually execute on those capital projects, when and if we actually execute on either of them.
Okay, thanks.
I will say for the water, Mr. Chua, that will come back to council for discussion because there's a scoping and a decision to be made on how to spend those CAC funds, so that will eventually come back to council.
Okay, thank you.
Any council, motion to extend? Moved by me, seconded by Councilor French. All those in favor? Opposed? It carries. Council staff announcements. I'm going first. I helped open the gondola on Friday, and it was really, really fun. It was such a good vibe, and it was so great to see that there were cars in that parking lot, and it was full all weekend. Thankfully, the sun came out. I just want to thank Mr. Lisa Bear for coming with her family and helping us open the gondola. It was fantastic. Joyce Williams came on behalf of Squamish Nation. Our MLA, Jordan Sturdy, was there. It was, the vibe at the bottom was jubilant, joyous. There were backcountry skiers just ready to head up there and get fresh tracks on the glacier. So kudos to that team for opening sooner than they thought. Thank you for including me in the opening. That was a lot of fun. Anybody else? Councilor French and then Councilor Anderson.
Just very quickly, because it is so late. It's Heritage Week at Britannia Mine Museum. We're in it right now, and it goes through until February 23rd. They've got some really exciting and interesting things happening at the Mine Museum to mark Heritage Week. And this has me thinking that if mining's not your thing, maybe railway is, and West Coast Railway Heritage Park might be more your speed to mark Heritage Week.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson.
Last Thursday evening, February 20th, I took the early shift in receiving visitors to our community forest open house. And the occasion for the open house was a newly proposed boundaries for the community forest. It's now proposed that the community forest take in the entire Squamish watershed. Anyway, we had good quality turnout, including by volunteers and keen to volunteer their skills. For example, graphics. You guys need a graphic designer, this sort of thing. So lots of good conversations and community groups represented at that open house.
Thank you so much. Councilor
Attended the Globe Conference. One of these things, it was a very interesting conference. Most striking thing to me was the amount of big market money that has already moved out of fossil, and how the markets really seem to be moving quite quickly, which on one hand is positive because we need to move quickly. On the other hand, it's a little bit frustrating because you see parts of the industry just sort of holding on. Doesn't seem like we're prepared for that transition, and so it's one of these good news, bad news stories. But overall, I left feeling fairly optimistic. There's a range of speakers, and I guess I do feel it would be a bit remiss of me. So current events of the day were mentioned, but some of the speakers, the Indigenous ones I heard, also mentioned topics like Colton Bushi and so on. So there is, I think, a whole lot of stuff bubbling up everywhere in Canada right now.
Thank you. There's no closed business to attend to at this time, so I'm open to terminate. Councilor Herford, seconded by Councilor Stoner. All those in favor, opposed, motion carries.